Good morning. Can everybody hear me? Okay, thank you very much. This hearing session is a part of a process that is examining the Welwyn Hatfield Local Plan Development Plan document. My name is Melvin Middleton. I'm a chartered town planner and an economist, and I've been appointed by the Secretary of State to hold the examination and to prepare a report on the development plan's soundness for the council. By way of introduction, this is my 5th examination into a DPD. I worked in local authorities for almost 35 years, mainly on development plans, before joining the Inspectorate, where I've worked for the past 14 years. Within PINS, the consideration of appeals into housing, shopping, minerals, waste and viability matters are among the specialities. If you've got any queries about the examination, other than in response to what I'm about to say in a few moments, or you want to contact me, then please, in the first place, have a word with my Programme Officer, Louise St. John Hart, who is sitting over on my right. Can I stress that I'm an impartial person? I'm not appointed by the council. I'm not employed by the council. I'm here to undertake an independent review of what they've done and what they're putting forward. As you probably gather from my accent, I live in the north of England. I have been to Welwyn before, but actually only once before this year, so I don't really know, or didn't know it very well. So I basically got no vested interest, no access to grind, whatever. As far as I'm aware, I don't know anybody who lives here, other than people that I've met in the course of starting this examination. If you have a mobile phone, please ensure that you've switched it off. If it goes off, I shall ask you to leave. I'm told that there isn't a fire drill, so if the fire alarms go off, it's for real. Everyone, unless the fire is actually behind the people sitting at the back of the room, is to exit through the door in front of me. Anyone who's not a member of the council staff doesn't need to hang around and assemble for a roll call. You can just depart. If, for whatever reason, the fire is to the rear of here, then the exit is through the doors behind me, straight forward, past reception and through the front of the council building. It would be helpful if everyone could sign the attendance list, which I presume is circulating, so that we've got a general idea of who is here and representing what. Is anyone here representing the press? No. Before anyone speaks for the first time, would you please introduce yourselves and indicate, if you do represent anyone other than yourself, who you're representing, and if you're from within the vicinity of Welwyn Hatfield, where you actually come from. Right, before I move on into the sort of generalities of how the examination is going to take place, it's appropriate for me to ask Colin Haig, who's the council's head of planning, if you didn't know, to give a brief introduction from the council's perspective.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Colin Haig. I am the head of planning for Welwyn Hatfield Council. Also sitting with me today, and who will be doing the majority of the advocacy of the plan over the hearing sessions, are Sue Tiley, who is the planning policy and implementation manager, Carol Hyland and Simon Chivers, who are principal planning officers, Councillor Mandy Perkins, who is the executive member for planning, who will be in attendance but won't be advocating the plan, Helen Kent from Land Use Consultants, who are sustainability consultants, and Wayne Beglin, who is our legal advisor in this process. And over the course of the sessions, there are also likely to be other officers who've been involved in the plan, who will be speaking and who will be helping organise the sessions. And these sessions will also be attended by many of the councillors that have been involved in the production over the plan of the last 5+ years. The council's fully aware of its responsibility to prepare a local plan for the area, to guide development, to plan for services and infrastructure, and to protect the built and natural environment. We adopted our district plan in 2005 and began the process of preparing a new plan for the borough soon after. Officers and members have worked closely to ensure that the plan has been prepared in accordance with national guidance and legislation. We prepared a local development scheme and a statement of community involvement and have reviewed and updated these in the intervening years. We've carried out a wide number of consultations, pre-issues in 2007 and 8, issues and options in 2009, neighbourhood consultation in 2010, housing target consultation in 2011, emerging core strategy consultation in 2012, draft local plan consultation in 2015, and proposed submission consultation in 2016. Members and officers have made themselves available throughout this process at consultation events, workshops and meetings to explain the purpose of the plan, the issues it needs to address, the options available, and ultimately the reasons for the choices we have made. We've diligently analysed and reported all consultation responses and made many important changes to the plan over that period. It's always been accepted by members, officers and most other parties, however, that difficult choices must be made that cannot satisfy everyone. We've commissioned a wealth of evidence on a wide range of topics to inform the issues, options, sites and policies. Some of these studies have been individual to the borough, some have been in partnership with adjoining authorities, and some have been joint studies covering the whole of Hertfordshire. Throughout this process, we've engaged consultants to carry out independent assessments of the sustainability issues and the habitat issues associated with those options and with those choices. We've worked in a constructive, active and ongoing manner with adjoining authorities and other bodies to seek to ensure that we've met the duty to cooperate requirements, and we've submitted a large amount of evidence to demonstrate our attempts to resolve the cross-boundary issues that have arisen and been identified. As a consequence, the Council has submitted what it believes to be a legally compliant and sound plan. We've sought to make productive use of urban and brownfield land wherever possible. We've taken the tough decision to release some land from the Greenbelt to help meet the need for new homes and jobs, and we've worked closely with statutory bodies such as Hertfordshire County Council to ensure that there will be sufficient infrastructure to accommodate that growth. We've also worked closely with other statutory bodies to protect and enhance the most important natural and built assets in this borough. As a result, we look forward to working with you, sir, and all the other parties over the coming weeks and months to hopefully adopt a plan that can successfully guide the development and protection of this borough over the next 15 years. Thank you.
Can I start by stressing that this hearing is not a hearing into a planning appeal, and it's not an inquiry into objections made against the plan. The basic purpose of the hearings is to assist me in assessing the soundness of the development plan. Thus, the agendas will focus on the matters that I wish to hear more about, having read all the relevant documents, representations and responses, because in those instances I'm not entirely certain about the way forward. Where parties have clearly stated their positions and I believe that I have sufficient information, then there will be no specific item on this agenda or on future agendas. Doesn't mean to say that I haven't considered what people say, I will have done, but as I say, the basic purpose here is for me to clarify things about this plan that I'm not certain about. Having said that, those making representations have a right to be heard if they so wish, and some of the matters that will be on the agenda will stem from that and from no other matter. There will also be catch-alls, any further points each day, so that additional points can be raised or questions can be put to opposing sides. However, I've issued a guidance note, and one of the aims of that is a suggestion that we try to eliminate repetition. That remains particularly important in this local plan. There are more objections here, substantially more objections, representations to this plan than any that I've come across in the previous ones that I've done. And if we're not very careful, or I'm not very careful, then we're going to get bogged down and this is going to go on, and I can't afford for that to happen. It's not in the best interests of the future planning of this borough. In line with national policy, my starting point for examination is the assumption that the Council has submitted what it considers to be a sound plan. Those that are seeking changes must demonstrate why it is unsound by reference to the tests of soundness. Now, they're clearly set out in the framework, and they're also set out in my guidance notes. And that is really what people should be focusing on. Why is a plan unsound in the context of those tests of soundness? If you consider an aspect of the plan to be unsound, additionally, I and the council need to know the precise wording required in order, in your opinion, to make it sound. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Okay. As a lot of you will know, significant changes to the development planning system were brought about by the former coalition government's localism agenda. As there's not been a pre-hearing meeting at which the current system would have been outlined and discussed in detail, I need to spend some time briefly outlining it so that everyone is clear about the current system for examining local plans. The Localism Act became law in 2011. Its provisions amend parts of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004, Section 112, which now governs the way in which development plan documents are to be prepared and examined, came to force in 2012. The Town and Country Planning, Local Planning Regulations 2012 came into force on the 6th of April of that year and replaced those of 2004, and they basically substantially changed the examination process. National Planning Policy Framework was issued at the end of March 2012, and it replaces all previous planning policy guidance notes relevant to this examination. It is now supported by National Planning Policy Framework Practice Guidance, which is an electronic document that is continuously updated. The changes emanated from that legislation and guidance apply to all development plans and fundamentally affect the way development plan documents are now to be prepared, examined and adopted. Under revised Section 20 of the 2004 Act, inspectors can no longer make recommendations for modifications, changes that affect soundness unless specifically requested to do so by the local planning authority. If inspectors consider the submitted plan to be unsound in any respect at the end of the examination process, then their only course of action is to recommend that it is not adopted unless the council formally asks them to do otherwise. That's quite an important change, actually, when you get to the practicalities of it all. It's my way of doing plans to be particularly pragmatic and to take a positive and proactive approach, as I've already indicated. I don't think it's in anybody's interest for Welland and Hatfield not to have an adopted local plan for an indefinite period leading into the future, and I will certainly do my best, given the constraints that I've just said, to persuade the council where changes are needed, in my opinion, to actually make the changes so that we can get an adopted local plan at an earlier date as possible. Changes to this plan will result in two ways. Firstly, if the council, on hearing the evidence and weight of arguments at the hearings, consider themselves that the plan is unsound in some respect or other. In such cases, they may propose changes in principle at the hearing sessions in question or at a round-up session. That is by far the easiest way to proceed, and I hope that the council will take a pragmatic approach to this examination, rather than seeking to defend every proposal or last word in its policies. Secondly, I myself, having heard the arguments and assessed the other evidence, consider an aspect of the plan to be unsound, in which case I will point this out verbally at the hearing session in question or at the round-up session, and if necessarily elaborate about my concerns in writing. The council then has the option of making changes to overcome the concerns or convincing me that the plan is sound in a particular respect without changes. If there is no agreement, then the only alternative now is for me to find the plan unsound, in which case the council will not adopt it and they'll start preparing a new plan. Minor changes are now to be referred to as additional modifications. These cover typos, grammatical mistakes, clarification matters, data information changes, etc. Other than to agree that they do not affect the plan's soundness, they are no longer a matter for the inspector. The main changes to the regulations involved referring to the development plan policy document as a local plan and the proposals map as a policies map. The presentation of policies and proposals on the policies map are no longer a matter for the inspector. So if the council wrongly defines sites on the plan, that is not something that I can get involved in. Where changes that affect soundness are made, I will need to ensure that the rights of third parties are not prejudiced by changes on matters which would take them by surprise. Reconsultation where appropriate changes might also need to be covered by a revised sustainability appraisal. Anyone got any questions? Okay, I've already read the evidence submitted by the respondents and the council in respect of the matters that are going to be discussed early. I'll be perfectly frank with you, I have not looked at the sites at all, although I am perfectly aware of where the major proposals for development are. But it's my intention in conducting this inquiry, having got the legal matters out of the way today, hopefully, to have a session in October on basically the overall strategy of the plan, and assuming that goes well, to then have a session towards the end of the year into the other policies that are of a strategic nature and the development management policies. And once we have got all that agreed and we've got somewhere in agreement as to how much development this borough needs, we can then get down to the nitty-gritty of deciding where it shall go. But I will not be looking at sites and the pros and cons of one site against another for some time. And in that context, I will be grateful if when people are talking today and subsequently until we get to discussing sites, if they refrain from advancing cases about particular sites. It will not help the process at all. We will go through each item on the agenda in order, and I will invite people to contribute to the discussion as indicated in yesterday's letter from the programme officer. I'm only expecting a brief introduction to set the scene for the subsequent discussion. I would welcome relevant comments and questions from any of you as the discussion progresses. Those that are participating, please stand your Toblerones on end to attract my attention if you wish to say something. Please note that unless I specifically agree to it, there will be no cross-examination. But putting questions to the opposing parties during the discussion by myself is perfectly acceptable, and in some contexts it's desirable. I'll take part in the discussion as well as chairing it. Please remember that my job is to challenge the soundness of the entire plan, not just those parts about which there have been representations from third parties. In some instances, I will act as devil's advocate in order to test the robustness of parts of the plan that other people have not questioned. In such instances, I will not necessarily be expressing my own opinions. At other times, I will be expressing the views of third parties who have chosen not to be present. And again, what I say may not necessarily be my opinion. As I've said, there's been an unusually large amount of representation against this plan. If the examination is not to be excessively prolonged, then it's more than vital than usual that it remains focused on the considerations that affect its soundness. I'll therefore interrupt participants who appear to me to be going off message. I hope politely, but as I come from a different part of the country than most of you, and where people's language is perhaps more blunt, please don't take offence at anything I say, none will be intended. We'll take a short comfort break at an appropriate point, roughly midway through the morning-afternoon sessions, so probably around about 11:30 when it's convenient in the agenda. The council has kindly agreed to provide tea and coffee for everyone, so we don't need to really spend more than 15-20 minutes on a break. Lunch will be around 1 o'clock for about an hour, and I aim to complete this afternoon's business by 5 o'clock. The programme officer's circulating agenda. If any of you want one and haven't got one, then please see the programme officer. Are there any questions at this stage on how the hearing will run? Yes, sir?
Can you just reiterate? Believe it was in the letter that was circulated yesterday, but just reaffirm. You mentioned about not talking about specific sites, but you did say in the letter that if there was an exemplar that illustrated a wider point that was exemplified by a particular site, that would be appropriate. Can you just reaffirm that that's okay?
Yes. I mean, I basically said that because a good number of the people who are participating today have clearly got interest in specific sites, and that is, if you like, their objective goal of being here. Others are not. And whilst I appreciate the way certain sites have been treated, may be contrary to national policy, it may be contrary to sustainability appraisal, etc., and what has happened in response of those sites could basically affect the legal soundness. I don't want it to basically degenerate into, you know, a long advocacy for developing one site. As I've already said, apart from knowing where the major development proposals are, I've not thought about them. I won't be thinking about them until next year. We need to get sorted out just exactly where, in terms of numbers of jobs, houses, etc., this authority is going to go before we start worrying about that. But if you want to refer to it in passing because it's, or to a site in passing because it's illustrating a point you want to make, that's fine. Okay? Anyone else? Okay. That's all the introduction that I've got. So we will move on to the agenda. Right, the first item has a development plan document being prepared in accordance with the local development scheme. I don't want to spend an awful lot of time on this because at the end of the day, if it hasn't, then the council can change the local development scheme so that it's in conformity with what is happening now and in the future. But if I'm correct, Aurora Properties and Mr. Davis want to participate in this, is that correct? Mr. Davis doesn't. No, okay. So, do Aurora Properties? Yes. Okay. Right. Can I just ask the council to give a brief introduction, saying what your position is on the local development scheme?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Yes, the Welland Hatfield local plan has been prepared in accordance with the local development scheme. The latest version of which was agreed by Cabinet on the 4th of April 2017. Dates set out for different stages in the preparation of the plan has been met, including consultation on the proposed submission version, which took place between the 30th of August and the 24th of October 2016. And also the plan was submitted in accordance with the timescales set out in the local development scheme. Thank you.
Right, Mr. Adams, do you want to respond to that?
Thank you, sir. Good morning.
Morning.
Our concern about the local development scheme and its relationship to the draft plan relates to the length of the plan period and also the proposal that there should be an early review of the local plan. And in essence, our key points are that as a result of the many changes to the timetable for producing the plan, indeed the timetable has changed on 5 occasions over the last nearly 10 years. The period of the local plan, the effective period of the local plan, is not 13 years as recommended in paragraph 157 of the framework, which advises that plans should be drawn up over an appropriate timescale, preferably a 15-year time horizon, taking account of longer-term requirements. And one of the implications of the considerable delay in the preparation of the plan and the need, therefore, to constantly update the local development scheme is that the planned start date has been changed from 2011 to 2013 without, as far as we can see, any clear explanation. So the Council is now promoting the local plan for the period 2013 to 2032. The previous local plan expired in 2011. And our concerns, sir, relate to the ability of the plan to meet the objectively assessed need. So clearly we're going to keep coming back to the issue of whether the objectively assessed need is being met and whether there's justification for not meeting the objectively assessed need. But the reason that is significant in terms of the local development scheme and the plan period is that 2 years between 2011 and 2012 have been lost in terms of making provision for housing. That was a period of time where there was a significant shortfall in the housing that was planned for. So that we're already starting with a shortfall as a result of losing 2 years at the start of the plan period. On the basis that the plan is adopted in 2018, the plan will be effective for 14 years. So we are losing a year at the end of the plan period in terms of the ability to plan for the housing needs of the area and to catch up on the significant shortfall that has already arisen. Now, the local plan relies on the release of sites from the Greenbelt to support growth, and development will be seriously constrained for the first 7 years and will rely almost entirely on the delivery of 3 large sites for approximately 4,000 new homes in the latter period of the plan. It's obviously a matter which we'll be debating later today and later in the hearing. Outside of the urban areas, the whole borough is within the Greenbelt, and any shortfall in housing delivery would therefore require a review of the local plan to release sites from the Greenbelt. And in our view, it's imperative for the current plan to meet present and future housing needs with the built-in flexibility required by the framework at paragraph 157, and that the proposal for an early review of the local plan would be failing to plan adequately for the objectively assessed need, and almost certainly the shortfall in housing that has arisen as a result of the delay in bringing the plan into operation will continue and will be rolled forward into the next plan period. So in summary, sir, and our concern about the local development scheme in the relation to the submitted plan is that the effective period of the plan is not 15 years, and that in our view there is no justification for an early review, and that the lost years the lost years between 2011 and including 2011 and 2012 that were lost as a result of the start date for the plan moving to 2013, and not compensating for that in projecting the plan forward at least 15 years, if not longer, means that there are serious consequences in the ability of the plan to meet the housing needs of the area. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to respond, Ms. Tilley?
Yes, sir. Essentially, the points that have just been made are soundness issues and don't relate to the plan's conformity with the local development scheme.
Right. Do you disagree, Mr. Adams, or do you accept that point?
No, I don't accept the point, because what we're talking about here, the local development scheme needs to consider the length of the plan period. And therefore, I think the points that we're making relating to the length of the period are certainly soundness points, but I think they're certainly relevant to the question. This is the only point on the agenda where we're examining the local development scheme, and so that's why we have raised our serious concerns about the length of the plan period under this heading. Obviously, those concerns equally relate to the implications for planning for housing need.
Okay, I mean, your points about the review, would you accept are something that we can kick into the long grass for now? It needs sorting out once we've decided how much development is going to be and whether the sites to put them on.
So I think the problem is one of kicking things into the long grass.
By long grass, I mean later into the examination.
Oh yes, I'm very happy with that. But I think
it's not something we need debate today, because it's not really to do with the local development scheme.
I think it relates to soundness, Sam. So
Yes.
it certainly would arise in the context of whether or not the plan accords with national policy.
Yes.
And so I've taken the opportunity to raise a concern about the plan period and the proposal that should be reviewed, which is very much part of a local development scheme content. And it was covered in the report that covered local development scheme matters on the 17th of April this year. So I've chosen to take those points, to flag those concerns now, sir, in the context of the local development scheme. I can certainly come back to them later, either today or during the hearing. Because I think the planned period is surely a matter that the local development scheme needs to address.
Okay, well, apart from the year, which we'll come to back to in a minute, are you content that, all right, things may slip, but the council can revise the local development scheme and make it legally compliant?
Yes, I'm content that the council could revise the local development scheme and could extend the planned period and specifically address the shortfall that has arisen in the lost years of...
Yeah, well, that's an argument for, if you're talking about housing, for the housing need debate, isn't it? It's not an argument for today.
Well, I'm happy to return to the issue when we debate housing need in more detail, sir.
I mean, it's, you know, it's part of the full objectively assessed housing need calculations.
I think it goes a bit deeper than that, and it goes to the whole philosophy of the plan and the ability to meet objectively assessed need. And if the plan period is already foreshortened and the effective date for the effective date of the plan has been delayed, then I think there is a point of principle around looking at the implications of a shorter plan period. It certainly comes into the whole debate around housing trajectory and how that compares to housing need.
Yeah, I think you're muddling two issues up, though. You know, there's the issue of the extra year, and, okay, if at the end of the day I decide that Welling can't meet its objectively assessed needs for whatever reason, and there will be a shortfall, then that's, by having an extra year, the shortfall is going to be compounded, isn't it? But where can you point me to in, if you like, government guidance or legislation that there has to be a 15-year period at least from the adoption of the plan to its end date?
So I've referred to the guidance. It is not totally prescriptive, but I think it's clear in paragraph 157.
Yeah. Do you wish to comment, Ms. Tilley?
Simply to agree that it's not prescriptive and that the local development scheme does indeed address the plan period and the plan accords with it.
I mean, can you see any reason why there shouldn't be a 15-year period from the adoption of the plan to its end date?
No, that was the original
Yeah.
intention. I think the examination is taking longer than we anticipated when we wrote the local development scheme, so that was certainly the intention, that there would be a 15-year period.
So if we could find the land for development, whatever quantum that might be, there wouldn't be any in principle objection to extending the period to 2033?
No, sir, there wouldn't.
Okay. Does that satisfy you?
So I'm happy to come back to the issue of the objectively assessed need and the trajectory and how that shortfall is addressed later in the hearing, because it's going to come up on at least one occasion.
Yeah. All right, thanks very much. Okay, the next item is the development plan document in general conformity with the community, with the statements of community involvement and its public consultation requirements. I have to say, with regards to this, I know there's been a lot of objection about it, but it isn't my responsibility to look into the finer points of the way the council has conducted its public consultation. What I have to be satisfied is that it has followed national legislation and guidance in terms of what it has to do in terms of public consultation, and having excuse me, prepared and adopted a statement of community involvement, it's followed the broad principles of that document, not, you know, dotted every I and crossed every T. So in that context, I'm quite happy for, you know, there to be as much debate about it as people wish. Could I ask the council again to briefly say whether they still consider that they have consulted on this plan in accordance with the legislation and their statements of community involvement, and how they've done that?
Yes, sir, thank you. Yes, the council does consider it is the consultation that has been carried out is in accordance with the statement of community involvement and indeed the regulations. This is demonstrated in the council's legal compliance self-assessment, which has been submitted to the examination, and indeed the Regulation 22 consultation statement and its appendices provide details of the consultation that was undertaken during the plan preparation, who was consulted, and the type of consultation that took place. Early engagement commenced in 2007, identifying what the issues and options should be in the plan, and this took the form of a number of events with various groups, focus groups, workshops with various interest groups such as parish councils, and also the council attended a local, what you could call a fete, I suppose, known as Kaleidoscope, where we had a stall and we engaged with the public. That helped us to identify the issues and options, which went into the issues and options document, which was published for consultation in 2009. In 2010, following the introduction of the localism agenda, the council held a number of neighbourhood workshops to help identify objectives. And then in 2011, there was the How Many Homes consultation. This was followed in 2012 by the Emerging Core Strategy, which consulted on the strategic policies in the local plan. And then in 2015, the local plan consultation document, which consulted on sites. This was all the Regulation 18 consultation. And then finally, sir, in last year, in 2016, consultation took place on the proposed submission document. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Davies of Panzanga People, would you like to start the ball rolling for the representatives, please?
Yes, thank you very much, and thanks to you, sir, for the opportunity to come here and contribute today. Yes, I'm from Panzanga People. We're a local residents group, and unlike developers and others, it will be us that will be living with the consequences of the plan that is agreed. So it's very close to our hearts, and that we are, passionate about the points that we make. And we are aware that the Localism Act and the MPPF gives some degree of voice to communities, which we hope will add some weight to the discussion here today. I will make a point firstly by just saying that the last Wellington Hatfield Borough Council newsletter was circulated to the previous consultees 1 working day after the deadline of today. It was, as far as we're aware, it went out on the 11th of September, and the deadline for taking part today was the 8th. So first question that came up after that is, why wasn't it sent out earlier so that residents could be informed about today and have the opportunity to take part? And we believe that this latest failing is indicative of how the process has been executed, and it doesn't do anything to foster community involvement in our view, and in our view we're again at the back of the queue. Just moving on to the Statement of Community Involvement document, which you had there, we believe it's pretty brief and lacking in detail compared to many others. We've looked at many other local authorities documents, and they go into far greater depth and detail about how they are going to consult, particularly about how they are going to consult with hard-to-reach groups. There's nothing in that document there about what the targeted measures will be for hard-to-reach groups, and we don't really have any evidence of what happened during the process to reach those groups. Our own group has often asked about the workshops and focus groups, as mentioned in the Statement of Community Involvement and has been mentioned today and several times in the past. We're not really aware of any of them taking part as part of the plan making process. Earlier this year I put in an FOI to the council about them. The Freedom of Information Officer's reply states that the last workshop or focus group activity was in November 2010, which I believe we just referred to as the neighbourhood workshop there by Ms. Tiley. That's quite a long time ago. That's almost 7 years ago, of course. The note produced by the council following that workshop, which I have a copy of it here, centres around the responses to the 2009 issues and options consultation. So that workshop was sort of looking back to 2009 and what was said at that time. At that time, it was still the Regional Spatial Strategy by the East of England Assembly. That was the template. It was long before any of this process came into place. At that time, there was no local plan for Welling Hatfield, just an early version of the emerging core strategy. The planning landscape back then, pre-MPPF and the Localism Act, was very different. It's worth one noting, I'm not going to be such specific, but there are many points noted in there, one of them being that one of the locations northeast of Welling Garden City was not supported by any group. So that, as early as 2009, that was being said, but of course that site, as we know, is on the agenda for now, is in the plan today. So I ask, really, 7 years on, how can the council claim that the event is evidence of community involvement and participation? It was so long ago. Residents have had no opportunity to be part of a local plan-making workshop or focus group in 7 years. Our group has actually asked for it, and we've been told it won't be happening. This is going back a couple of years. There's been one visioning workshop, but that was not centred on the local plan, and it was not billed as a local plan event. I'm actually not quite sure what it was intended to achieve. There were more developer and professional people there than residents by a long, long way, as I attended it. It would be fair to say, just on the consultations, that many residents that we speak to now have consultation fatigue. Through the last 4 consultations, we have been saying much the same thing, and we have seen, following each iteration of the plan, in the subsequent consultation, virtually nothing has changed. It's just come back again, and people were getting tired with putting in the same thing again and again. The last one, of course, the last consultation is the one that really mattered, as that's the one that I guess you would be looking more closely at. Many of the people who commented before had given up by that point, and this is sort of borne out, we feel, by the numbers, because the 2016 consultation, the last one, yielded just under 2,200 responses. The 2015 consultation yielded 5,500 responses. This is according to the council's own numbers. This demonstrates that people who commented previously have begun to give up all hope, and that the council has failed to attract new people to respond to the consultation. But this is not surprising, because to our knowledge, Welling Hatfield Borough Council has never written to residents directly informing them of the local plan or its consultation exercises. Not a letter in 7 years, as far as we know. Yet in the last year, it was able to write to all residents about the new charges for the brown bin collections. Why could they not put something about that, about the local plan, in with that letter, just to make people aware of what's happening? In response to your preliminary questions, the council cited a stakeholder event in October 2013 as evidence of the duty to cooperate. this is just one event. Our residents group didn't attend. We don't recall being invited. We've spoken to other residents groups and they don't recall being invited or knowing anything about it either. So throughout the process, we've been frustrated by the fact that we've tried to rally people to make as many points as possible, but they've kind of felt more disengaged as it has gone along, and it doesn't matter because it's all going to happen anyway, which is pretty much what's happened. You know, the 2009 plan and what you have before you today, in terms of where the major site allocations are, is pretty much the same, and people, I think, have got tired of making their points again and again, only to see them really have no impact on what's actually going to come about. Just a final note, the last consultation, it seemed to us that about 1.4% of the borough, which is I think roughly 120,000 people, responded to the last consultation, and this was said to be a significant amount, but many of those responders were actually not residents but developers and people acting for developers and other lobbyists. So the actual figure for residents was probably lower than 1.4%. We don't feel that this is really community involvement in any great degree. It would have been nice to have seen some workshops, some focus groups, as the SCI points out. It would have been nice to have maybe at least one letter sent out to people just to try and get that 1.4% up to a much more meaningful figure. So I think that's where the other points I make are all in the statement.
I've read it. I mean, although you say the numbers making representations have gone down, in your context they're still in the thousands, which is not insignificant. Believe you me, it's not insignificant. I mean, the last local plan I examined didn't have 1,000 representations across the piece. So, you know, I'm not sure that that's that relevant. But basically, what we're about and what I'm about is whether or not the council has actually legally complied with what they're supposed to do in terms of consultation. Whether I or you or anyone else thinks that they could have done more or they could have done it differently is neither here nor there, because that's not what I can make a judgment on. There's, you know, basic standards set down in the legislation and the national guidance, but although there's a lot made of localism these days, in the context of local plans, the actual amount that council are required to do is pretty minimal. And I mean, yeah, I wouldn't disagree with you that there should be more focus groups, etc., etc. But again, it's a matter for the council to decide how it wants to go forward. You know, that's what you elect people for. So, Ms. Tilley, you want to respond?
Yeah.
Well, just to say that the last workshop wasn't in 2010. I think the Freedom of Information request specifically asked questions about the neighbourhood workshops, and I think you might have been given the last date of the neighbourhood workshop session. So, for example, there have been workshops on the strategic housing market assessment in 2013, and a number of residents groups were invited to that session. There was a workshop on the economy study where local businesses were invited to that session. There was a workshop on garden city principles, and I know, I believe Pansanga people attended that one. There was a workshop on the Green Corridor, and a number of local groups attended that. So there have been a number of workshops throughout the preparation of the plan. But what the statement of community involvement says is that we will use the type of consultation that is appropriate for the stage that we have reached. In general, when you're at the early stages of the plan and you're thinking about issues and options, workshops are particularly helpful. When you've got a document you want comments on, it's more appropriate to have a formal consultation and publish that for everybody to comment on.
Yes. Okay. Well, the Freedom of Information request was very specific about workshops and focus groups, and the response was November 2010 was when they last happened. The visioning workshop and a couple of the other ones you alluded to, they were not billed as part of a local plan process. They were not. They were about things, you know, local issues, but they were not. It was never said, and I've got the notes and I've got the agenda and everything for the visioning one. It doesn't say anywhere that this is to contribute to the local plan. This workshop is for the local plan. it doesn't say that. So it wasn't clear as part of the process that this and the thing in October 2013 that you mentioned where local residents attended or were invited, we weren't aware of that, and I've asked around and I don't know anybody else that was aware of it as in terms of residents. So I take on board that you say these things, but we've been making these points all the way along and they've sort of fallen on deaf ears, so I don't really know where to go with it. I completely take your point that legally the local authority has to comply to some extent with what's nice, with what's not what's nice, with what should be done.
Well, they've got to comply with what the legislation says.
Yes.
And they've got to at least follow the spirit of what they say in their own statements of community involvement. I mean, my only redress to this is to tell them to go out and consult again, which are obviously going to be loath to do because it will delay things and cost an awful lot of money. And to do that, really, you know, it's got to be hung on something. You know, they've got to have fundamentally gone against national legislation, fundamentally not followed what they said they were going to do in the statement of community involvement. Now, you know, if you can point me to things in that, all right, we can take it further. But if you can't,
So the annual monitoring reports talk about the consultation process and the feedback from them. And there's at least one that says bullet points a list of things that people said were not being done properly, you know, which centre around the things I've mentioned here. And the annual monitoring report says we will take this on board and we will update our process for next time, but it doesn't happen. Next time is just the same as the previous time.
no, but the previous time may well have been in accordance with what, if you like, a minimalist authority would do to conform vis-a-vis community involvement. I'm not saying that what you're talking about in terms of public consultation shouldn't happen, but you have to remember that it's about balancing time and resources, and at the end of the day, it's the decision of the members of the council.
I accept that, and the time we've had quite some years, and myself and other members of the public are very happy to give up our free time to go to these things, and we would hope that the council could make available a few people to facilitate that. And as I say, there's been 7 years. I would just, well, more than that, I would just reiterate that, you know, the council says it's got a desire to engage as broadly as possible with the public. The above issues will be considered when planning future planning consultations. This was in a previous annual monitoring report for 2014-15. We went ahead with the last consultation, and these points that people had made previously equally apply because they didn't change things. Again, people were nobody's been written to in 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, but I don't think it's mandatory that they should be. I'm not saying
Okay.
it's not a great idea, but it's not, you know, mandatory that councils have to write to every individual household.
I accept that, but as I
Which
said,
is- yeah, but, you know, if it's not mandatory, I can't intervene and say, I'm sorry, you've not carried out this consultation properly, start again.
yeah, it's a shame it's not mandatory, but I accept what you're saying.
But that's a, you know, political decision at the end of the day.
I would hope, I guess more broadly, I would hope that, you know, as the second garden city with a long heritage and history and all of that encompasses, we would try and do better than just kind of the minimal. We wouldn't be a minimal authority. We wouldn't be good enough. We'd actually get in there and do a really good job. That's what I would hope.
Yeah, but you should be telling your, you know, local
Oh,
representatives and the
we've
leader of
done
your council about that,
we've
not
done
me.
much of that. We've done plenty of that.
Okay. Mr. Quinton.
Thanks, sir. I'm not going to repeat everything Will said because he said better than I could what we submitted in our comments to the consultations. What I would like to just draw your attention to, well, a quick question for you first, sir, and that is, you just mentioned that what is done has to meet the spirit of what the council's stated policy is. Now, that's where I think we have an issue, because I think they come up with lots of lovely words about wanting to listen to people and consult and have community involvement, but we just don't see any evidence of it. And I think, I mean, if you just go back through the history, and Ms. Tiley is absolutely right, I mean, things did go back right to 2007. I participated in the, I think we were developing a sustainable community focus groups back in 2009. We submitted comments through all of the consultations ever since. But they've gradually got narrower and narrower and less really open to input, and really nothing has changed, as Will has said. And my role, I'm a county councillor. I got elected with 48% of the vote in my area, which covers central Welwyn Garden City in May. And I would say that having knocked on hundreds and hundreds of doors, not just in my area but across the borough, this subject is almost universally felt when you know, people feel that the consultations that have taken place are a waste of time, that their voices haven't been listened to. Nothing has changed. Every time we go, we get the same sites back, we get the same, essentially the same approach, which is what we've been on at them about since the beginning. And just one thing that I would like to bring into the conversation. Right at the beginning of this, there was an opportunity for this council to engage with the rest of Hertfordshire. The University of Hertfordshire, in common with Lord Salisbury and Gascoigne Cecil Estates, held a charrette at the university in 2008, looking at the impact of the East of England plan, the RSS as it was then, and what was then 10,000 homes for us, 80-something thousand across the county, and how as a community across the county we could address this challenge. And it came up with some fantastic work and some really sound conclusions. This council barely participated. Certain councillors did, but I don't remember the officers paying it any attention at all. And in all of the preparation of this plan, I've not seen one mention of the conclusions of that very, very good piece of work, and no follow-up at all on what could have been a really good guiding light to developing a plan that people had some faith in, because the whole purpose of the charrette, the whole methodology. Yeah, sorry, but this is the point. It's just that it's about finding ways to engage the public, and they haven't done it.
Well, you say they haven't done it, but you know there are thousands of representations against this plan. I mean, you can hardly say people were unaware about it.
Well, I agree that there have been thousands of representations, but they've mostly been ignored. I mean, I think,
Well,
yeah, I mean, so and there've been less as you've gone on.
well, I wouldn't
For
know
that
whether
reason.
they've been ignored or not, but it's very unusual for people to lie down and say the green fields at the back of where I've lived for the last 20 years should be built on. If they wanted to do that where I live, then I'd be protesting. But that's not to say that in the overall scheme of development needs of a particular area, particular site is not a good place to build. Just because thousands of people object doesn't mean to say that in planning terms it's wrong.
No, but I think the objections haven't just been like that. They've been on the basis of why those areas are not good, why a different approach could not be taken.
Well,
You know, and that's the thing that's been ignored.
You'll no doubt tell me the different approach when we start talking about the strategy.
Yeah, sure. And that we'll come back to that later, I'm sure.
Yeah, I haven't forgot Little Heath. Little Heath's a bit of a unique case, so let's get rid of Welwyn and Hatfield. Aurora Properties?
So, Michael Gallagher from Hogan Noble, Mr. Adams for Aurora Properties. Could you use your microphone? Sorry. Thank you. We deal with the question of community consultation in our hearing statement, so I thought I should say something on this. I accept, sir, that your conclusion may be that this is a matter, as with the local development scheme, which is properly discussed in more detail under the objectively assessed needs issue. But our point on this is that there are aspects of the consultation which do give rise to concerns. I think our answer to the question is that you posed is broadly yes. But our concerns are that the basis of consultation was not correct, and by that I mean that the council has consistently consulted on housing targets which aren't sufficient to meet the objectively assessed need, and therefore has not given itself the opportunity to meet those needs. And we say that the effect is that the basis of consultation means that the plan itself is not justified when it comes to the tests in the MPPF. The other point to make, which probably relates to the point Mr. Davis has made, is that the length of time over which the plan has been prepared means that consultation has been piecemeal. I think where we come out on this, so another point to make is that as an example of a lack of consultation, we don't believe that there was adequate consultation on the council's site selection methodology as a further example. So I think what we would ask, sir, is that during the examination, particular time is taken to look at the matters over which we say there hasn't been effective consultation, such as that site selection methodology and the opportunities to meet the OAN, so that those matters can be given more scrutiny than they were during that consultation process. Thank you.
Do I take it from that you're not arguing that the council has failed to meet its legal duties on the consultation?
No, so we're not saying that.
Right.
We're taking issue with the basis of the consultation. I mean, I think that is very much part of the adequacy of the consultation process, and maybe it's a fine line when you come then to look at the legal duties. But I think we wouldn't go that far. We're more concerned about that basis.
Okay. Mr. Tilley, do you want to say anything at this point?
I'll just make a number of points. A comment's been made that the council doesn't send out letters notifying every resident, but what it does use is its council magazine to advertise that the consultation events will be taking place, and that goes to every household. So, and that gives you the opportunity to include a little article, some pictures. May not be as full as the consultation document itself, but it does give the opportunity to raise awareness amongst residents. So that's the council's approach, and I would not agree that the consultation has been piecemeal. I think it's been quite extensive, and certainly the local plan consultation document included a large number of sites in the document, and didn't actually consult on a target. It set out what its objective assessment of need was at that stage, and just posed the question that if only the more favourable sites came forward, that would mean it wouldn't meet the OAN. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, and can I just say that this part of the documents, which is about 5 inches high, all relates to the council's consultation processes. There are reports on consultation or documents concerned with a particular consultation. I mean, certainly in terms of paper and written material, there's no shortage. Well, okay. Mr. Pelledri, Little Heath.
Thank you very much. Good morning. There's no question Welling and Hatfield have gone to extraordinary lengths to have meetings, and there's been a lot of work involved. That is not in question. But the planning policy framework says quite clearly this should be a collective enterprise, yet in recent years planning has tended to exclude rather than include people and communities. And it goes on, people have been put off from getting involved because planning policy itself has become so elaborate and forbidding. The preserve as specialists rather than people and communities. The National Planning Policy Framework changing that. It's changing that. We're allowing people and communities back into planning. Item 17, the plan should be genuinely plan-led, empowering local people to shape their surroundings. Item 69, local planning authorities should create a shared vision with communities of the residential environment. I'd ask for some evidence of those too, but Welling and Hatfield has not conducted themselves in this manner whatsoever. I agree with your sentiment, sir, that, you know, how do we address this? What do we do now? Go back out and consult is not realistic. But this is very relevant for future discussions when other items come up. Oliver Dowden, MP for Hertsmere, you know, there wasn't much consultation in Hertsmere and around Little Heath. wrote in, we as councillors for the part of Little Heath which falls within Hartsmere are writing to raise our objections and serious concerns. Firstly, we express our disappointment that Welling and Hatfield did not see fit to consult with us directly on these proposals. There's some very glaring omissions from what should have taken place. Welling and Hatfield failed to accept or answer questions. As Little Heath, we've met with councillors, we've met with members, we've attended planning meetings, and they've denied the right to accept or answer questions. They've restricted questioning to 15 minutes per session. At the meeting in this room where the plan was approved to send up to the council, the chairman refused to answer a question based on a 15-minute curfew. 2 other councillors later commented this was unreasonable. The point is there's been lots of activity, but realistically, none of it's been absorbed. And we're now talking about the matters that you yourself, sir, have raised because Welling and Hatfield have not listened and have not even taken on anything aboard. They carry on forward no matter what happens. And we're talking about these matters today, which you yourself have raised.
I don't have any choice other than to raise them and check whether or not, it is legally compliant in the
Quite right.
responses that are on the agenda. Do you wish to say anything, Mr. Lee?
Just to comment that on the accusation that Hartsmere Borough Council weren't consulted, they were consulted and have been engaged throughout the process of preparing our local plan. And we did hold a consultation event in Little Heath at the request of Little Heath residents so that officers could engage with residents of Little Heath and explain the consultation that was at the local plan consultation document stage, the site stage, when the sites in Little Heath first appeared.
Okay. Anybody else wish to contribute? Okay. Right, we'll move on to sustainability appraisal then. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, I didn't notice.
You were coming to me.
No.
I just wanted to expand a little bit on. Sorry, I should use the microphone, shouldn't I? I wanted to just expand a little bit on the issue around consultation and its effectiveness, because in the Borough Council's own statements of community involvement, I believe there's a sentence along the lines of the council aims to encourage localism, so wants to ensure that the local community is engaged effectively. Now, the gentleman here alluded to the response within the MPPF. I think, for me, there is a decision that you may need to make about what consultation constitutes in a kind of legal context. Because most people would argue, I think, or contend, that consultation means actually not just talking to local people, but listening and acting on that as well. And to give you a bit of evidence as to why, whilst there has been a number of consultations, the local community might feel that those have been utterly ineffective in terms of engaging them, I would refer you to the I'm sure it's in that pile of documents next to you, the documents that went to full council in 2015 or 2016 that referred to responses to a consultation for the local plan to go forward. There was something like 400 plus responses in there, and every single one of them had a response from officers of no action. Now, that, for me, fundamentally illustrates the problem, is that if you ask people about stuff and there is absolutely no response to any of the responses, there's no reaction to change things in reaction to the responses, that is not an effective consultation. Now, whilst I appreciate that in kind of legal terms, that's quite a difficult thing to have to determine and decide, I think what you have to ask yourself is whether an actual consultation has taken place at these stages. There's also another aspect that I wanted to talk about, and that is the issue around consultation about particular sites. And there are 2 or 3 sites that were treated in a somewhat different way to the remainder. And I will use as an exemplar a site that's in my my own ward, which is Hat 11. Now, Hat 11 was consulted on, and when the options and choices for sites to go forward in the plan were made, it was excluded by officers. There was a meeting in 2014 where council members and representatives from the community were given an opportunity to speak against particular sites. And, of course, because Hat 11 was not on the table at that point, nobody made any comments or any objections about it going forward because we weren't expecting it to go forward, right up until the very last statement in the meeting where the executive member for planning put that site back in. Now, what that effectively did was exclude any opportunity for democratic involvement in the decision as to whether that site went forward or not, and no opportunity for a local member to actually make an objection to it because the process had already been completed. So there are at least 3 sites that fall into that particular category as well, and I think the consultation on those sites is particularly vulnerable to challenge. So I think those are the 2 points that I wanted to make, that you do have evidence that perhaps the engagement effectively of communities wasn't very good, given that there were no changes to the plan as it went to full council for submission. And second, that there are a number of sites where the consultation process was significantly and fundamentally different to the rest.
Yes, but just because thousands of people say they don't want someone to build at the back of where they live doesn't necessarily mean that in planning terms the council's choice of a site for development is wrong. And the other point is that, it is the prerogative of elected members to overrule recommendations put forward by their officers. Now, what I'm here for is to make sure that in doing that, it is all perfectly legitimate and they have sound planning reasons for doing it. I mean, planning is not an accurate science. Different people have different judgments about certain things and they give different weight to different things, and you can end up with different results because of it, and none of them are wrong necessarily. But, in some instances, they are wrong, which is where I would intervene. But we'll see whether we get to that.
I do take the point. However, if you have a sequence of 400 plus responses and not a single one is taken on board and action made because of it, and it's a long way from this. Yeah, it's a long way from this particular site should be excluded because I don't like it.
Okay.
There are a lot of other responses in there as well, all of which were not actioned. And I think that it starts to build a weight of evidence that actually, in terms of being effective consultation, that was not what was happening.
Yeah, but the legislation and guidance doesn't say that you have to act on what the consultation results in. You have to consider it, but you don't have to act on it.
I think, as I say, I'm trying to make the point that if what the legislation says, and it would appear that that's what it says, is that you engage effectively. I think there's a question as to, I think there has to be a question as to whether the interpretation of effective engagement would suggest that this is not what's happened here.
No, but that's for another place, not for me. Okay. Did you want to say anything, Mr. Quinton? You keep putting your card up and down.
Sorry. My colleague next door I was just confused about when you say the legislation, because isn't the MPPF part of that legislation?
Yes.
Okay, so if that is saying what a friend here read out a little while ago about it has to be generally plan-led, empowering local people and creating a shared vision with communities, if that opportunity has not been given, then surely it's not in line with the legislation.
Well, why has that not been given?
Well, that's a very good question, but it
Well,
hasn't.
I know.
The last time there was any attempt to engage in a meaningful way with the community was back in 2009 or 10. That's the only time that any attempt to encourage people to shape the policy and to engage with the plan rather than giving a list of things that people can then object to or not. So the only time a sort of collegiate approach has been taken by this council was back 7 years ago or more.
But isn't that a product of the complexity of the plan and the length of time it's taken to prepare it?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, I'm not sure that...
I mean, if you kept going back to start talking about first principles, you'd never get anywhere. I mean, you have to make a judgment that this is the way forward, and then you start putting meat on the bones.
But if that... I mean, things changed between those, as already been commented. So the National Planning Framework's come out. In the meantime, the numbers have changed, which probably does have an impact. And as I said, I mean, the tools that were there have not been used anyway. I mean, things like the charrette. Sorry, I'm going to come back to that again and again, I'll warn you now. But it is the fact that, you know, we've got a very, very good mechanism for getting people involved. It's been used in the borough, but it's been ignored by the borough.
Okay. Mr. Davis.
Yes, sorry, just one more point by way of an example for what was being said there. I think it was 2014, the sites were put into different boxes of being least favourable, finely balanced or more favourable. And the particular meetings I think that were being referenced were where there was a vote taken on this, and then just before the vote was taken, one of the sites, the site close to where I live, went from being finely balanced to more favourable by the lead officer. This was against what the planning department had suggested. So, of course, local people didn't know that that was going to happen. It was dropped in 10 minutes before the end of the meeting, and it was quickly voted through as being more favourable. So it was kind of a bolt from the blue that nobody knew was coming. So nobody could be involved because that wasn't the plan up until 10 minutes before the meeting ended.
Well, I've no doubt you'll raise that later. You know, I mean, but the issue is, were there sound planning reasons for it being changed? If there were, then I'm not sure there's anywhere I can go. If there are not sound planning reasons, if it's been done for other reasons, then yeah, I can go somewhere with it.
Yeah, I'm sure there were reasons. Whether they were sound planning, I wouldn't...
No, but, I mean, that's what it's about, isn't it? You know, is it a sound plan? Has it been based on proper principles? In terms of site selection, you know, have they gone through an objective process comparing all the sites? Now, that objective process may not be the same process as I would have gone through, or 10,000 other planners might have gone through. It could be slightly different in different ways. But as long as it's not, if you like, you know, corrupt, or for want of a better word, then again, you know, it's acceptable. But, you know, I don't know the circumstances, and no doubt tell me in due course. Okay, does anybody else want to say anything then about community involvement? If not, it's almost 20 past. If you're quick, you ought to ask the programme officer if you wanted to participate.
I'm a local resident. I have nothing to do with the council or anything, but I am just a resident. And the feeling that is amongst a lot of residents is that we're not listened to. The public is an inconvenience to the council. A site has been removed from the local plan after some consultations. It just slipped out of the local plan. Another one just got put in 2 months before the deadline. And it was put in under New Village rather than Simonside. And so a lot of people didn't know what that referred to. The council seem to pay lip service but take no notice of what people say. And they may comply with the law, but it's not the spirit of the law. They don't listen to us at all. Trevor Saunders, who was here at the council, head of services for a short while, and Colin Hay, have both presented at Brooklands Park Residents Association on how to oppose sites that are included in the local plan. I don't think that's right. But as a member of the public, we do feel that we are not listened to. Thank you.
Okay. Right, I'm going to adjourn for 20 minutes for some coffee, after which we will be talking about habitat regulations. I don't know whether we need to play musical chairs or not for that. Oh, I beg your
I
pardon.
didn't mind,
yes.
but I do.
Sustainability appraisal, yeah, I'm ahead of myself. Yeah. Who's introducing the next? Welcome back. I was told that some of you couldn't hear me very well. Is that still the case? Can you hear okay? Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, if you can't, stand up and wave your arms, okay? And that same applies if other people are speaking and you can't hear them. Right. Next item on the agenda is the sustainability appraisal. Are its conclusions sound and have they been taken into account in the DPD? Would the council like to briefly introduce its position on this, please?
Thank you, sir. My name's Helen Kent from LUC, and we've been providing sustainability appraisal support to the council throughout the preparation of the local plan. You can't hear me? Okay.
You probably need to bring your mic a bit closer.
Sorry. Is that better? Oh, get closer. How's that? I do get told I'm softly spoken, so do give me a shout if you can't hear me. Okay, great. My name's Helen Kent from LUC. LUC are the council's professional advisors on sustainability appraisal matters and habitats regulations assessment in relation to the local plan. The sustainability appraisal has been carried out in accordance with relevant legislation and guidance, including the Strategic Environmental Assessment Regulations and guidance in the planning practice guidance. The sustainability appraisal is sound and the council has met its legal requirements in this respect.
Thank you. Arlington, we're going to start for the representatives. Which one of you is going to do it?
I was going to, sir. Thank you.
Thank
My
you.
name's James Strawn, QC. I'm here on behalf of Arlington. And I'm going to be very conscious of your preliminary remarks. We obviously have an interest in a particular site, but I'm going to confine but I'm obviously going to confine myself to the general principles. I am going to come to an example which requires me to just mention our site, but I'm going to focus on the general principles.
Okay, thank you.
And I've got three main issues to cover on sustainability appraisals. You've got our written representations, so I'm not going to repeat those, but they are set out there. But the three key points which relate to the invalidity of the sustainability appraisal we ask you to consider are, first of all, the failure to consider reasonable alternatives properly. Secondly, the failure to take into account the objectives, the stated objectives of the plan in the sustainability appraisal. And thirdly, and so I'm very conscious this will overlap with some of the points you're going to look at this afternoon, but if and to the extent there are legal flaws, such as in the duty to cooperate, they flow into the sustainability appraisal, because the sustainability appraisal just looks at whatever's presented by the council. So I'll touch on that, conscious we're going to come back to that. But taking those 3 points in turn, can I just start with the failure to consider reasonable alternatives? And you're very well aware that that is a legal requirement under Regulation 12 of the Environmental Assessment of Plans and Programmes regulations. And it's, in turn, flows from European legislation. And you've got a document. I've got it down as SA6, but it's got some appendices to it. It's dated August 2016, and it's said to be the sustainability appraisal for the submission local plan. And, of course, it's a thick document. There are a lot of words in there. And if you read it, and you've just heard similarly an assertion that everything's all right, it will say we've looked at reasonable alternatives. But of course, compliance with an obligation to look at reasonable alternatives isn't met by simply saying you've done it. You've actually got to have done it. And that means looking at the substance of the exercise that's been undertaken. And that's really what I want to focus on, not just on what I call assertion and the thickness of the document, but the substance of it. Now, so there is no dispute with the council that they needed to look at reasonable alternatives, and in some cases there can be a debate about whether an alternative is reasonable. And then the questions of judgment had to be made about whether or not you needed to look at it. We're not in that territory because our focus is on what is clearly recognised to be reasonable alternatives, but whether or not they were in fact properly compared and analysed as reasonable alternatives. So you're well away from those questions of judgment which can arise in some cases. Now, at this point, I just have to give you the example of the failure. Of course, that means looking at a site. But can I just make 2 points about that? The first is I'm not going to go into the full detail of that because that would eventually be a matter of site-specific analysis.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try and avoid doing that. And the second point to make is that the example I'm going to give of, obviously, HAT 2, which is the site we're interested in, we're also comparing it with HAT 15, or the Simonsbury new village. And both of those, in terms of housing numbers, are very strategic issues. So I'm not really looking at site specifics. I'm talking about things which go to the heart of the plan in terms of the sustainability appraisal. But I'm very conscious of your point, so I'm going to try and avoid getting into the detailed specifics.
Thank you.
But can I just illustrate the point? So what you've got to be satisfied is that this document contains a proper analysis of reasonable alternatives to enable the plan-making authority to have looked at sustainability in a proper sense. Are they properly comparing true sustainable alternatives to make proper judgments? And in the example I'm going to give you, and there may be many others, of HAT 2 and HAT 15, you'll probably know about the background to those and the way that the Simonsbury new village proposed. Sorry, did I say Simonsbury? Simonside. Apologies. At Simonside, the way that new village came in at a particular point. I'm not going to go over that.
I don't know, other than that it seems to have come in late.
Came in late.
I'm not sure I need to know.
You don't need to. You don't need to know other than that's sufficient to know that. You'll no doubt hear much more about that in due course.
I bet.
But let's just focus on the issue of have they been properly analysed?
Yeah.
I think if you could just turn to the index of this document, the contents page, it starts getting quite confusing even at the beginning. If you've got the contents page, you'll see section 6 is sustainability appraisal findings. And if you go down in that document, when we get to the question of sustainability appraisals of new housing, and you'll see that it's divided into a number of locations. Hatfield, you've got that, page 121. Then you've got the villages north of Welwyn Garden City, villages south of Hatfield. Then you've got the rural areas. Those are the four subject headings. If you actually turn up rural areas, page 164 in the document, there's a subheading rural areas there, and you'll see alternatives considered. And then the way this document works is that there's an analysis of alternatives considered for the approach to rural areas. I'll just let you find that, sir. It's about, on my copy, it's about halfway down the heading, rural areas. And I took you to that in the contents page. If you go back one page, 163, you've got a rather strange heading, new village. I say strange because it doesn't appear in the contents page. And the preceding section is actually to do with villages south of Hatfield. So the new village not only appears late, but actually doesn't feature earlier on in the contents. Now, I'm not taking some technical points about the contents page, although it's indicative of what I'm going to illustrate. But you'll see that the new village, which is the HAT 15 Simonside site, is then analysed in the section 6405, but actually it features in the rural areas section. So although it's got its own heading, I'll just show you this, page 168. And I'm sorry if it's confusing, I didn't write this document. 168, you've got table 625. And you can see SDS 6, which is the new village site. So we're in the rural areas section, and then what happens is there's a comparison of the Simonside site against other rural area potential alternatives.
Well, isn't that what you would do?
It would be what you would do if, and I'll come back to the first heading, 6405. If you read it, it says no reasonable alternative sites for a new village were identified by the council for the purposes of the SA. However, the other reasonable alternative sites within or adjacent to Welland Garden City Hatfield and the named villages could all be considered to be reasonable alternatives. So rightly, the authors of this document recognise, and we say entirely rightly, that in fact the other sites in and around Hatfield are clearly reasonable alternatives to the approach of finding a new village. And that's stated clearly in 6405. What, of course, is missing, and is a basic failure of approach, is any comparative analysis in sustainability appraisal terms between those alternatives. The error that's occurred is to assume that when you come to your analysis, you look at Simon's side as against other rural area possibilities, not to compare in sustainability terms the use of in and around Hatfield other sites, which is necessary. And that
can I just interrupt?
Yeah,
I mean, coming in as an outsider, and given the point you made a few moments ago about it being late in the process,
Yeah.
I would assume that the basic strategy is to, first of all, develop land outside of the green belt, and then looking at the green belt, you're looking at extensions to existing settlements, and the main focus seems to be on the larger ones rather than the smaller ones. And only after that, if you can't accommodate your proposed growth, do you have to start looking elsewhere?
Well,
I'm assuming, I mean, I might be totally wrong, but I'm just assuming that the processes that have gone through have eliminated certain sites around the fringes of the urban areas for certain, no doubt, good planning reasons.
Well, they're not eliminated as such. There's a comparative analysis in for example, in around Hatfield, which is what you're talking about. Would you develop on the edge of Hatfield first? There's a comparative analysis of the site merits.
Yeah.
And if you, just to show you that, if you go back to the Hatfield section on page 134, it's actually in a landscape format, page 134.
Yeah.
What we're now looking at sites in and around Hatfield, and what you've got are the allocated sites and then reasonable alternatives. Hat 2 is one of the other reasonable alternatives. You can see it's the first one. And then there's a comparative analysis in the sort of matrices form to look at those as reasonable alternatives on which judgments are made. And that's accompanied by a textual analysis, 6.315 on page 131. It's not just a matrices. What you get is a discussion of comparing sites in and around Hatfield. Now, I'm steering clear of the judgments because that's for another day. So that. But what you're absolutely right, sir. What you get is a comparison between sites in and around Hatfield and then some judgments made. What you don't get, despite these other sites being recognised as reasonable alternatives to the new village, is a comparison between the new village and these other in and around Hatfield sites and the sustainability of that approach. And that is essential, we say, for a proper sustainability appraisal on such a fundamental issue.
But isn't it like comparing chalk with cheese?
Not at all. Because
Well, surely if, you know, your strategy is basically to concentrate the development within the existing or adjacent to existing built-up areas, you know, a new village in the middle of nowhere is a sort of major sort of step change, isn't it?
well, it is, but the comparison, or what you need to consider as a reasonable alternative is it better, more sustainable, to develop some of the other allocated sites in and around Hatfield as compared with a new village?
Yeah, but surely you must have exhausted the sites in and around Hatfield before you start looking for the new village and come with, you know, as I said, I mean, I don't know, I might be, you know, barking up a gum tree, but you come with sound planning reasons why there is no more land adjacent to the towns, for example, to propose.
No, well, that's not how the document works, because they're not exhausted. They're just judgments made on a comparative basis to say, are these reasonable alternatives? They have pros and cons, and then you compare your allocated sites. So I'm going to stick with these. I won't go into these other sites. But if you're then saying, I'm going to propose a new village, which is sustainably a very different concept, we say unsustainable, but that's again a debate for the future.
Almost by definition, it has to be less sustainable than developments on the existing the boundaries of an existing settlement.
Right. Well, there's no. Well, in which case you're hitting the nail on the head in terms of our complaint about the sustainability appraisal. There is no comparative analysis between the sustainability of developing one of these other reasonable alternatives in and around Hatfield with the sustainability of a new village. And if I could just do what you would have to do, for example, in the exercise, if you got 135 still open.
Say it again.
Have you got page 135 still open?
Yeah.
Do you see Hat 2? I'm not going to get into the judgments, but basically you've got a matrix with criteria and you get different scores as you go down. Do you see? So your proximity to transport. And likewise, the new village has its own matrices, page 168, in a separate part of the document.
Mm-hmm.
What there is there's no comparative analysis of the sustainability of the new village versus using sites in and around Hatfield.
So you're saying that sites that have been rejected in and around Hatfield have not been rejected for fundamental planning reasons. You know, they may be, you know,
exactly.
greenbelt sites that, you know, in terms of the greenbelt purposes, you know, they're scoring very heavily as among the most important land in the greenbelt. Therefore, you know, unless there's really, really exceptional circumstances, they shouldn't be built on.
Yeah, they haven't been rejected for those reasons because, and as recognised in the paragraph I took you to, they are reasonable alternatives. And it then becomes a question of pros and cons. But 6405, which is the paragraph I took you to, recognises that these in and around Hatfield sites, including ours, but there are others, are reasonable alternatives to the new village. I'll take you back to that paragraph if you want. They're not being said to be non-reasonable alternatives or ones that are knocked out for other planning reasons. They're recognised to be reasonable alternatives, but then the exercise that's required in the sustainability appraisal of comparing them in sustainability terms is not carried out.
But if there were reasonable alternatives, and given that even when they were putting this plan together, they weren't quite meeting their housing targets that they put forward, why weren't they allocated?
Well, that's another complaint. But that goes to whether they should have been allocated as in any event under in and around Hatfield. And we obviously disagree with the judgments made about that. But the crucial point is, before going to a new village, or at least in making that judgment, you have to compare whether that radical move, which is to create a wholly new village, different settlement pattern, is actually more sustainable or less sustainable than using some of the reasonable alternatives which were not preferred compared with the allocated sites.
Yes, but there are other reasons than sustainability for rejecting sites.
They can be, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
But
isn't
they-
that why your site's been rejected?
No.
Oh, all right.
Well,
We'll find out in the fullness of time.
But well, if it has, if that's right, we can discuss that. But what we're focusing on is the sustainability appraisal,
Yeah.
which is a discrete document. It doesn't say, rightly, HAT2 or any of these other sites aren't reasonable alternatives because they've been rejected for other more fundamental reasons. To the contrary, it tells you in terms, these are reasonable alternatives.
All right.
Well, I've just taken you to that paragraph. It's not; those aren't my words.
No.
Those are LUC's words, and that's
Okay.
their judgment. And we agree with it. Of course, they are reasonable alternatives. But what you then have to do, as a matter of law, is compare those reasonable alternatives on a proper comparison basis. So, for example, and you're right to saying there are differences in the nature of developing alongside a settlement and going into a new village. But when you came to, for example, sustainability scores on proximity to employment, proximity to public transport, this comparative sustainability of a new village versus a site close to Hatfield are going to be clearly very different.
Yeah, which is why you wouldn't go there unless you really had to.
Well, I agree you shouldn't go to the new village, but if you're going to make the decision to go to a new village,
Yeah.
you have to do it on an informed basis,
Yeah.
which looks at the comparative sustainability of doing that rather than using a site close to Hatfield. That's the point. The error in the sustainability appraisal is to recognise that. They recognise it 6.405, but what they then don't do is have a proper comparison between the sustainability of the two different options. And that's
Well,
essential.
look, surely in the context of the new village, the options are developing the new village where they've proposed it, developing it somewhere else within the district away from development, or presumably expanding some of the small washed over settlements.
No, or using some of the sites in and around Hatfield.
Well, yes, but if you've got a pecking order, you look for development land within your urban areas, brownfield sites to start with, greenfield sites to start with, and then you end up, we haven't enough land, so we have to look at the green belt.
No, well, so you're going back to the point, which isn't right on this document, that our site was rejected as not being a reasonable alternative. Our site is accepted to be a reasonable alternative.
Okay.
And that, I just have to refer you back
Yeah,
to 6405 and to the documents earlier in the page. I agree with you. If a site had been rejected as not a developable site or a site which is completely wrong for development for whatever reason, then it's not a reasonable alternative.
No.
But that's not the case for
All
our
right.
site.
I'll take your word for it.
Well, if you look at 6405, page 163. You don't have to take my word for it. I'm happy you're prepared to, but but I prefer you took it from the document itself. However, second line, the other reasonable alternative sites within or adjacent to Welwyn Garden City, Hatfield, and the name village could all be considered to be reasonable alternatives in their own right.
Oh, okay.
And that is a reference back
Yeah, right.
to the document which previously defined our site as a reasonable alternative around Hatfield. You can even see that, if you're in any doubt about that, it's also in figure form, figure 6.2. We appear on a map as a reasonable alternative, and we're assessed as a reasonable alternative against other sites in and around Hatfield. Just give you the reference to figure 6.2. That's a bit earlier in the document. Yeah, if you turn to page 107, actually there's a figure 6.1. You can just see, actually I'm looking for figure 6.2. there's a map which tells you where the reasonable alternatives are. Page 127. It's the next page after 127. Have you got? Yeah, it's actually not page 128 because there's another 128. But it comes after 127. You got figure 6.2,
Yeah, I had a minute ago. Yeah.
and you can see hat 50 on a plan here. Hat 15 is it's just after page 127.
Okay, yeah, got it.
You see it, top left, hat 15, allocated site, that's Simon's site.
Mm-hmm.
And then hat 2, which is our site, adjacent to the existing built-up area of Hatfield, reasonable alternative site. And that it translates through into the section on in and around Hatfield where it's looked at as a reasonable alternative. You read it with 6405, we're told it's a reasonable alternative to the new village. There is no comparative exercise done as with the new resorting to a new village rather than resorting to the reasonable alternative sites, including our site, as a more sustainable strategy. And I put this, why we're discussing it under this topic, is this is a legal requirement. Reasonable alternatives, whether identified, have to be examined. And that involves a comparative exercise between what you're proposing and the reasonable alternatives, and that exercise is not done. If, just moving on, if it's being suggested, well, or we haven't done the exercise that I'm saying should be done in a table form, but you can somehow extract it from the assessments that are in the two documents, because you've got two matrices tables. That's plainly not right, because when the SA, the Sustainability Appraisal, assesses alternative sites in and around Hatfield, in that matrices I took you to on page 134, it's accompanied, as it should be, by a textual analysis of the pros and cons of the sites in and around Hatfield. That begins on page 131. You can't rely upon a pure matrices. You've got to have the analysis, and that's contained in 131. And there is no textual analysis comparison between the matrices for the new village as compared with the reasonable alternatives in and around Hatfield. And I put it very simply, so that is a clear breach of the regulations, the requirement to look at reasonable alternatives. It may well be a product of it coming in late. I've already pointed out the way this new village doesn't even sit within the contents page, but it doesn't excuse the legal obligation to do the exercise. And it goes, of course, to an issue at the heart of the plan. Is that properly a sustainable approach? Resorting to a new village, allocating new housing in effectively an unconnected area, isolated from the current urban environment, is that a sustainable approach? And is it sustainable in comparison with the options of using reasonable alternatives in and around Hatfield? That is an exercise which has to be done properly to make a judgment of that kind, and you will not find it in this document, and that is what is required. The second point I raised was, of course, about the objectives of the plan, and this is a linked point. You've got, I'll just give you the reference, I don't want to repeat it, but it's paragraph 10 of our representations for today. But in short, the submission local plan has its objectives set out right at the front, and paragraph 3.2. That's on page 30. And paragraph 1 is to provide for the borough's development needs over the plan period in a form which maintains the existing settlement pattern. And to suggest, as I think it's suggesting, that it maintains the existing settlement pattern to create a new settlement, a new village, is plainly illogical. It's a departure.
It's not illogical if there's no alternative.
Well, it may be if there's no alternative, but I've already addressed you on that point. But this is one of the objectives of the plan. The sustainability appraisal doesn't grapple with that point. It doesn't say, well, contrary to the objective, we're going to resort to a different settlement pattern, namely the creation of a new settlement as part of our sustainability approach. But I agree there's an overlap with the first point I made. And the last point, that I said there were 3 points to make, this does overlap with points you're going to come to in a moment. Could you just turn up for me in the sustainability appraisal, page 50, I'm going to say 52, but actually it's 51A. But it's the map after page 51. You're going to hear some debate about things like the duty to cooperate and the compliance with the statutory obligations and policy. But can I just put it in this context? The sustainability appraisal necessarily is only looking at what options the council has explored as a result of any cooperation or lack thereof that's occurred. And if you just look on the left-hand side, you'll be well aware of the St Albans District Council boundary that runs along the whole western side of Welwyn Hatfield. And you'll see not only that, but Hatfield, the major conurbation, sits virtually adjacent to that boundary. And clearly, as you're going to hear more about this later, duty to cooperate with St Albans is fundamental in our submission to not just the legal duty.
You'll leave that till later.
Well, I just flag it up for you because the sustainability appraisal is going to be flawed for the same reason as the duty to cooperate if it's not considering sustainable alternatives that take account of what's going on properly in St Albans. So if the two authorities aren't speaking together properly about the cross-boundary issues, what's going to be assessed in the sustainability appraisal isn't going to be a proper, reasonable alternatives because the two authorities aren't cooperating. So I know we're coming on to it in more detail later, but it's something that inevitably flows into the legal validity of the appraisal, and it's made very clear graphically by this map. St Albans has already been found not to have cooperated, comply with its duty to cooperate. It's virtually inconceivable, so far as we can see, for a sustainability appraisal to be legally compliant in those circumstances. So those are our 3 points.
Before I bring anybody else in, does the council want to respond, or will you respond? Will you explain to me? Because although I have skimmed through this, I've not read it in detail. I will look forward in anticipation to do that.
Thank you, sir. Yes. Yes, I just wanted to make a few points in response. I think the first thing to note is that you are correct in your analysis in relation to the inclusion of Simon's Hyde. I mean, that's a matter for the plan rather than the sustainability appraisal. But yes, you are correct. And the local plan sets that out at paragraph 24.2. The second thing to note is that looking back at paragraph 6.405, which has been referred to you, it goes on to say, having acknowledged that there are other reasonable alternatives, it says that the likely effects of developing these reasonable alternatives are reported earlier in Chapter 6 of the SA report. So the findings of the sustainability appraisal in relation to other sites, including HAT2, are reported. That proper analysis has been undertaken. All sites have been appraised consistently against the sustainability framework and against and using the assumptions that are set out in Appendix 2 of the Sustainability Appraisal Report. So each site that is brought forward and all reasonable alternatives, this includes all of the sites, are appraised in the same consistent way. So they are each subject to that required analysis against the sustainability objectives. The sustainability appraisal reports on the reasons for selecting or not selecting the allocated sites, for the reasons for either allocating sites or not. But those are set out, and those are based on the reasons that the council has taken forward. So, for example, HAT2, the reasons for not taking that site forward are set out in the sustainability appraisal at paragraph 5.164. I think the other thing I wanted to mention was in terms of the settlement strategy. You mentioned that the plan looks at developing around the main settlements, Welwyn, Garden City and Hatfield, and then it goes on to look at the rural areas. Now, the whole settlement strategy and the approach to strategic sites is set out in the Sustainability Appraisal Report at Chapter 5. So it sets that context before getting into the detail of reporting the appraisal of individual sites. So that context is made clear. The order of the Sustainability Appraisal Report reflects the order of the local plan. So it follows the same contents so that it's logical and people can then cross-refer from one to the other more easily. And appraisals of sites can be compared with each other using the information in the Sustainability Appraisal Report, the matrices, the tables that have been referred to, and the comparative text, and also using Annex 1, which provides all the detailed tables and matrices. So sites can be compared with each other. The council has that information in front of them when making their decisions, and local people and other parties can also undertake that comparison. Sites don't need to be shown in the same table to be compared with each other. For example, if Simon's Hyde, taking that example, using the approach that has been suggested, it would need to be presented in a number of different tables. So you then get repetition, double counting, confusion. And so the way that we've approached it is to take the structure of the plan and use that. The necessary information is there. And the sustainability appraisal has been carried out in accordance with the guidance and regulations as necessary.
Okay. Do you want to come back?
I think I set the challenge to tell you where there is a comparison in sustainability terms as required between the reasonable alternative, recognised reasonable alternative of developing HAT2 or indeed the other sites around Hatfield versus a new village. That's essentially what I said is lacking in the document. I've listened carefully to what was said, and as I understand it, it's accepted there is no such comparison. What's said is that you could compare the two if you were to look at two different matrices and put them side by side. That's not an exercise that's been done. That is an exercise that's required. But more fundamentally, you can't compare the two in that way. If you try and do it, I've already made the point, you don't have any of the textual analysis of the comparison that's necessary. And secondly, the matrices don't tally, as you will quickly find out if you attempt that exercise. What is actually being looked at is a comparison between Simonside and other rural areas, not Simonside and in and around Hatfield. I can give you an example of that.
Yeah, no, I follow where you're coming from.
Yeah.
What I don't understand is the logic of doing other than what the council appear to have done, assuming that they've looked at Simonside and they've looked at expansion of washed over villages as a last resort, because all the other sites, including yours, for whatever reason, have been rejected as not developable, certainly during this plan period. You know, and that could be, you know, because of minerals, for example, or it could be because in Greenbelt terms, if you like, their contribution to the purposes of the Greenbelt are such that they should never be built on.
Well, that's not the conclusion.
Well, I don't know. I've got to read it up.
Well, you can read.
Logically, that's what I would suggest might have happened.
Yes.
But
Well,
I may be proved wrong.
Well, I don't have a quarrel with what you would logically expect, but when you start unpicking what's actually in the document, you'll unfortunately find the lack of logic from what you'd expect. Take minerals, for example. Simonside itself is a site which has to be potentially subject to mineral extraction first. It's I've recognised in the plan. If you want to see that.
Well, no, let's not go there. We'll be going there another day.
But you can see. Now, what you're getting at is a comparison between the two alternatives, which is all we say is a sustainability appraisal requires, based on competing merits. So, for example, impact on the green belt, if you were to develop it, versus one site versus the other. These aren't insuperable obstacles. They're judgments that are made on a comparative basis. Sustainability, employment, transport, all of those things. Is it better to go for a new village or around Hatfield? That is an exercise that's required to be done if you're going for a fundamental strategy of adopting a new village as compared with using sites which are identified as reasonable alternatives. I would totally understand your point if our sites have been rejected as reasonable alternatives, but they are accepted as reasonable alternatives. That then requires the comparative exercise to be done, and it hasn't been, as I think has been confirmed. What you're told is, well, someone could do the exercise from the data here. That doesn't fulfill the requirements of the regulations, and in fact, if you try and attempt that exercise, you quickly run into the buffers of the lack of textual analysis and the differences in the matrices.
So what do you want to happen?
Well, I want the law to be complied with.
Right.
And the law requires, Regulation 12, a reasonable alternatives to be properly examined. And that requires a sustainability appraisal that does that exercise. It's not just a paper production exercise. No. It's about them making the right decision based on the sustainability appraisal. So it's no good for the council just to produce an addendum essay saying here are the comparisons. Then there needs to be a proper decision made. Have they really made the correct sustainable choice in putting new housing in the middle of a countryside in a new village as compared with the comparative benefits of using reasonable alternatives in and around Hatfield, elsewhere? That's an exercise that has to be done as part of the local plan. If that means holding up the local plan, so be it, but that is what the law says.
But in terms of logistics, if that were, or if that had to be done,
yeah,
presumably it's providing it's done before the plan is adopted and I sign it off, then that would get around it all. Because I'd be surprised if there weren't certainly revisions to the sustainability appraisal.
Well,
unless the housing numbers are going to suddenly come down, I just don't see how you get around it.
Yeah. Well, I can understand revisions to the detail of the sustainability appraisal. Our concern, I think, is being blunt, as you perhaps encourage me to be, is that what you need is a genuine choice based on a a sustainability appraisal. You don't want the momentum of the plan to have caused you to follow a process. I'm going to stick with my plan, even though your sustainability appraisal hasn't done the necessary exercise. The council needs to make an open-minded choice, and should have done in the first place, on a comparison basis between sustainability of the in and around Hatfield sites versus a new village. And if someone could assure me that that was a exercise capable of being done without influenced at all by the stated local plan, fine. But I think it's a rather tall order to ask the council to approach it in that way. So I mean, I put it very simply. Our primary point is the plan should be stopped to allow this exercise to occur. If you're against me on that, then the exercise has to be done, and it has to be approached with an open mind. If they can do it in the timescale you're suggesting, I don't know, but they need to obviously follow all the necessary consultation requirements. I don't know about the timescales of producing a document of that kind.
Okay, thank you. Mr. You want to say something quick? Yeah.
Thank you. Just to respond to some of those points. When thinking about the matrices and how each site has been appraised, they have all been appraised consistently. Those matrices for each individual site can be found in the Sustainability Appraisal Report at Annex 1. So you can look at both of them together. The Sustainability Report summarises the reasons for selecting sites, and Appendix 5 provides a statement of reasons for whether sites have been included or excluded in the plan. And the Housing Site Selection Background Paper 2016 sets out how sites have been considered in a balanced way and selected. The sustainability appraisal formed part of the approach to site selection, and that included looking at the results of the sustainability appraisal. But you were right to say that there are other factors involved too. The council has chosen where to allocate sites informed by the sustainability appraisal amongst other considerations, and growth has been distributed where the most suitable sites are located in the most sustainable locations. The Sustainability Appraisal Report also refers to the issue of the shortfall between capacity of sites in built-up areas and elsewhere, and that is why it needed to look elsewhere around, not only at the two main towns, and that is all reported in the Sustainability Appraisal. So that information's there. The paragraph is 5.37, and that's where the council then decided to undertake a Greenbelt review and look further to consider releasing land around the Greenbelt, around the larger villages and as a new settlement.
Okay. Mr. Bolton.
Thank you, sir. Roland Bolton of SPRU, representing Bayard Developments and Wattsdown Developments Limited. And a lot of the heavy lifting on what the point I was going to make has already been done. And it is around the issue of reasonable alternatives. These are set out in our submissions to you, paragraphs 3.1 and particularly, 1.3 and 1.19. I'll pick up just 3 points. The first point, following on from the consideration of particular sites, when we look at what the SA says in paragraph 6.333 in terms of well 1, well 2, well 15 in Welling, WGR2 and WGR3 in Walmer Green and OHM7,
and these are all identified as reasonable alternatives to the north of the borough. Given the amount of information that's been, those aren't all our sites, sir. We've interested in some, not others. But I'm using them as an example to you. Given the size of the sites and the information that's been submitted to the council in the preparation stages of the plan, we can't find the justification of why these reasonable alternatives have not been selected and the ones that have been selected have been selected. Now that's a fundamental part of the SA process, much the same way as my colleague across the table has pointed out. The SA process shouldn't be a paper chase through a lot of documents. Save Historic Newmarket versus Forest East District Council made that point. And these should be assessed, if you like, in an equal way. So, firstly, if you can look at those, and our view is that there isn't a clear reasoning behind site selection given in the SA between preferred and preferred reasonable alternatives. And again, we're talking about reasonable alternatives. We're not talking about things that have been deemed unreasonable. My second 2 points concern whether or not the SA has looked at the reasonable alternative in terms of the range of housing requirements. Now, it does refer in paragraph 618 that earlier work and further work has been done on alternative levels of housing within the borough and have been subject to separate consultation. But separate consultation is not the same as looking at the impacts of different levels of growth, and of particular whether or not the full OAN as was or as is now has been assessed in the SA. Our view is that it hasn't, and it is a reasonable, it would be a reasonable alternative. Other submissions have been made about higher levels of growth, some such as ours, which is based upon a 10-year rather than 5-year migration figure, is a reasonable alternative. It might not be one you decide, but it is certainly a reasonable alternative that an SA should consider. And the last point, the third point linked to that, is that the SA doesn't actually consider the impact of the stepped approach to housing set out in SP2. It assumes housing is delivered to meet a level of need. What it doesn't take into account is a negative impact of not meeting that need in the early part of the plan period. And those impacts could be, for example, increased commuting distances through the borough. Or it could be things such as increasing house prices, decreasing affordability, increased need for social housing. So there's a number of things that haven't been considered, and clearly a stepped approach to housing provision, as opposed to a normal annual one, which one might expect. They're both reasonable alternatives. They've not been assessed. Thank you.
I don't mind. I'm happy for you to continue if that works.
Thank you, sir. Our concern in relation to the sustainability appraisal is that in some respects the apparent conclusions of the sustainability appraisal are not sound. And I'm going to use as an example a larger village. I'm going to try and avoid descending into site specifics unless that would be helpful. Because we will return to this issue when we look at sites. The sustainability framework is based upon an assessment of potential sites against a set of criteria which reflect the long-term community objectives of the council. And the source for that is section 4 of the sustainability appraisal. And in section 4, in figure 4.1, which is, it starts at page 29, one can see the range of objectives that are against which sites have been assessed. And I won't go through them, all of them, but I'll just highlight what the main themes are. Health, long-term objective 1, health improvement. Number 2, safer communities. Number 3, good citizenship. Number 4, improving the environment. Number 5, decent housing. Number 6, a thriving economy. Those are the main headings against which sites have been assessed. And they are objectives. They are setting out an aspiration for a sustainable pattern of development. What the criteria do not do is seek to assess infrastructure constraints. So potential infrastructure constraints are not listed as criteria. That is the subject of the infrastructure development plan and other evidence-based documents. And that is absolutely right, because for the sustainability appraisal to include infrastructure constraints as its starting point for considering what sites are sustainable or not would be contrary to paragraph 157 of the framework, which is the first bullet, which says that local plans should plan positively for the development and infrastructure in the area. So the whole approach is to plan positively development and infrastructure. Now, our concern is how the sustainability appraisal apparently introduces the lack of infrastructure as a reason for concluding that some sites are not sustainable. And we will go through the detail of this when we start looking at infrastructure and specific sites. But the concern arises from Appendix 5 of the Sustainability Appraisal. And we're particularly concerned about the conclusions reached in Appendix 5 at the last page. Now, Appendix 5, which is in the Sustainable Appraisal report, it is an appendix in that report, introduces the issue of a constraint on infrastructure. In this case, and what we're particularly concerned about, is an alleged constraint of capacity of primary schools in a larger village. But that issue has not been addressed in the main body of the analysis, because the framework doesn't include the consideration of capacity of infrastructure. That's a separate part of the plan. And yet, the conclusion of the sustainability appraisal is that this and other sites should be excluded on the basis of infrastructure, although they've been found to be sustainable, inherently sustainable, and reasonable alternatives. So our conclusion is that the sustainability appraisal, and particularly Appendix 5, goes beyond the scope of the sustainability appraisal. It's introducing a conclusion which is not supported by the analysis within the sustainability appraisal. It's not a criteria that has been assessed. It's bringing in information from elsewhere. and therefore the sustainability appraisal is going beyond its scope, and it's conflicting with the framework, which is to plan positively for growth. It would be a perfectly fair reason for the local plan site selection to consider, but not for the sustainability appraisal, because the criteria in the sustainability appraisal are not probing that issue. It's not in the criteria. Well, I think our point is that there are sites that have been found to be reasonable alternatives and inherently sustainable within the main body of the analysis, but then at the very end of the process, in an appendix, they are excluded for reasons that haven't been considered elsewhere. So the sustainability appraisal does not set out to consider infrastructure capacity. That's considered elsewhere. So our view is that the sustainability appraisal has gone beyond its scope in including that analysis, and therefore it's confusing because it has concluded that a number of sites are inherently sustainable. I think our point, sir, is that the plan should be approaching the accommodating growth of housing in a positive way. And if there is a need to increase capacity, then it should be looking for solutions, not using that as a reason to exclude sites. Well, we're not satisfied that they have at all, sir, and we'll come on to that later. But our concern is the way in which the sustainability appraisal adopts a point around infrastructure capacity, which is not part of the actual analysis in the body of the report. It shouldn't be in the sustainability appraisal, in our view. The key find. But then the site shouldn't be in the sustainability appraisal either. No, well, the purpose of the sustainability appraisal, as I see it, is to consider what sites are capable of accommodating sustainable development. Then it's for the local planning authority to consider whether there are demonstrable reasons why those suitable sites should not be allocated. But they should be doing that not by muddying the waters of the sustainability appraisal. They should be doing that and making clear what the justification is for excluding sites. It is the order of the process. So the sustainability appraisal should be considering what sites are capable of accommodating sustainable development, and it should not be ruling out sites if there are capacity constraints which are quite typical arising from housing. Those should be approached positively and in a different part of the site selection process. Thank you.
Yeah, if that's okay. I might deal with that last point first, if that's all right, just because it makes sense. Just to clear up a couple of things there. The appendix that's been referred to, Appendix 5 of the Sustainability Appraisal Report, sets out the Council's statement of reasons for the inclusion or exclusion of sites. It's clearly titled as such. it is not, the SA is required to report on the reasons for allocating sites. The SA itself, the sustainability appraisal itself, does not make recommendations or decisions on allocating sites. That's clearly a matter for the council. But the sustainability appraisal is required to report on what those reasons are. That's why it does that. That's Appendix 5. Just in relation to the sites, or the issue of infrastructure that has also been referred to, all of the sites are appraised, as I've said, consistently. And the sustainability appraisal does not go beyond its remit, if you like, that it's set itself in this score. It, in relation to the infrastructure which has been raised in particular to the Aurora property sites, which is around education, school places, the sustainability appraisal criteria looks at and actually looks positively. It doesn't seek to look at whether infrastructure is constrained or not. It simply looks at whether sites are within a certain distance of a school or another education facility. If they are, it scores them positively, and that's all it does. So it doesn't rule out sites on any reason like that, and it is the council that makes the final decisions on which sites to allocate.
So if I've understood you correctly, you really looked at every potential developable site in the sustainability appraisal, whether or not they may at the end of the day be knocked on the head through infrastructure constraints.
We've looked at all reasonable alternatives.
Yeah.
So yes, any site that the council has considered as a reasonable alternative, whether or not it has been allocated in the plan. And in fact, we look at the sites without having that information.
Right.
We don't know whether they are allocated sites or not. We look at them before we have that information.
So effectively, sites have been sieved for infrastructure after the sustainability report across the board.
Not necessarily.
Oh.
Sue might like to...
Should I just come in on that? Sites which were found suitable, available, deliverable in the HELA were all considered to be reasonable alternatives which were put forward for sustainability appraisal. The council then, as part of its site selection process, looked at cumulative impact and impact in particular on infrastructure such as education, and that assessment took place at the site selections stage and is in some cases a reason why some sites were rejected. But they would have been in the appraisal because they passed that first stage of being suitable, found suitable in the HELA, which only looked at sites on an individual basis.
So sites that were really very unlikely to come forward because of infrastructure were not in the frame in the first place, but it was only at the end of the process when you started looking at the finer points of some of them that other infrastructure constraints came up. Is that right?
Yes, so if a site clearly wasn't deliverable because of an infrastructure constraint...
Well, you know, the case I sort of outlined along with the RN, you know, that needing a new motorway junction before you can develop it.
Certainly, yes.
Yeah, I mean, what would be the point of
Absolutely, it
running
wouldn't
the
be.
hair in the first place?
Wouldn't have been a reasonable alternative.
Yeah, okay, I understand. What did we get to? Mr. Sikowski?
Thank you. I wasn't initially intending to contribute to this session, but I felt the need to after the initial discussions with Mr. Strachan, because I think I fully support your contention that actually, if you're comparing an urban extension with a new village in the countryside, that actually you're comparing chalk with cheese, and actually there is demonstrable evidence that that assessment has actually been undertaken at a strategic level. That's what the Hertfordshire Charrette did in 2008, and it came to the conclusion, contrary to actually what yourself said, sir, that a satellite village was actually, in environmental sustainability terms, more sustainable than an urban extension. And actually, the assessment was quite clear that a satellite village, in environmental terms at least, environmental sustainability terms, was more acceptable. Other factors being taken out of the assessment, and that assessment was by the Building Research Establishment. That was not an unauthoritative body making that assessment. I'd also say that the contention that each and every strategic site, at least, and indeed the wider set of sites, should have been compared directly with each other is also an unreasonable expectation. Given that if you have, say, within the local authority area and indeed adjacent authorities, say 15 strategic sites, you then wind up with 225 contra assessments within each one. What it goes to is whether a planning authority and a planning expert can actually make a reasonable assessment based on the matrices in a sustainability appraisal of 15 sites. And I think the answer to that is that it's not unreasonable to expect an experienced planner to be able to make that kind of assessment just reading 15 matrices. So I would contend that the requirement to have cross comparisons is not a reasonable one either.
The new settlement that you referred to, did you say that was in a Hertfordshire context?
It was indeed in a Hertfordshire context.
So it wasn't necessarily looking for somewhere in Welling Hatfield?
No, it wasn't. It was looking at Hertfordshire as a whole,
Right.
because at the time it was attempting to deliver the housing requirements for the RSS.
Yeah, okay. All right. Mr O'Leary.
Thank you, Inspector. Brief introduction. My name's Gary O'Leary. I'm Chairman of the Central Hearts Green Corridor Group and also Chairman of a local parish council that happens to abut the border of Welling Hatfield Borough. It's called Hartingford Bury Parish Council. Just wanted to make a couple of comments on sustainability appraisal, SEA, and that will flow a little bit into probably the habitats question as well. I'd like to reflect back on Mr. Haig's introduction at the beginning of today, which I'm assuming would have been representative of the plan approach. And Colin said Welling Hatfield Borough Council had examined habitat issues relevant to the site choices. Now that's quite important to us. As a parish council, we've done quite a bit of ecological evaluation work, and I would hope that that was representative of the plan approach. However, when we come to look at the site selection work and the evidence base below that, there is actually no evidence that that habitat assessment work has been done prior to site selection. And that's a requirement under due diligence of plan making and is an absolute requirement of the NERC Act 2006 in terms of decision making of any council body, including a parish council, would you believe? So critically, absolutely critically, prior to any decision making and site selection process, which clearly could affect deliverability and viability of those sites, the council has not undertaken its due diligence. Now, I will later talk about duty to cooperate and some of these potential sites cross-border, but just within its own terms of its suggested approach, it has not taken into account the necessary habitats. I will pick an exemplar on a particular site. If you take east of Welling Garden City, the policy talks about creating safe routes, this is a quote, creating safe routes for wildlife, and it talks about protecting and enhancing wildlife assets. Well, it stands to reason that you cannot do that until you understand what is present. And there has been no effort to make any assessment of understanding what is present. This parish council that I represent met with both councils to have that specific discussion, and were given no information regarding assessments that have been done. The developers for different sites have not brought forward sensible assessments. So I would say that in terms of the sustainability aspects of that, the council has not fulfilled its legal requirement. The plan cannot be seen sound, and pure momentum of the plan, to use the quote earlier, cannot be seen as obviating those legal obligations. Thank you.
Do you want to come back on that?
Thank you, sir. Okay, so in relation to the Central Hearts Green Corridor concerns, Can you hear me okay? The sustainability appraisal has followed the necessary requirements in terms of looking at habitats. The assumptions set out at Appendix 2, which basically take you through all of the sustainability objectives, the criterion, and then say how the appraisal is done, include a criterion on biodiversity, which is 4.6, which looks at designated sites. So those would include the nationally important habitats, sites of special scientific interest and so on, as well as local sites. It looks at those, and it also looks at other greenfield land. In parallel, the Habitats Regulations Assessment has also been carried out, which I think we'll come to talk on a little bit later on today. But that has been done in parallel with the preparation of the plan and has also informed the site selection process. The Habitats Regulations Assessment is required to look particularly at European protected sites, of which there's one which overlaps slightly with Welwyn Garden, Welwyn Hatfield Borough, and another which is a little further afield, which is also a key one. But it's certainly fulfilled its requirements in relation to considering habitats in that respect. In terms of ecological assessments and those sorts of more detailed work which you would expect to take place at a planning application stage, we're at a plan making stage at the moment, and we need to be proportionate in terms of the evidence that is considered. It's also got to be consistent across every site. And so this is why we look at, in particular, we look at designated sites, but we also acknowledge and make an allowance for the links and corridors between those sites and for wildlife which lives in other parts of the countryside as well, so non-designated sites, both greenfield and brownfield. I realise I haven't actually come back to the points that my neighbour here on behalf of Banyard Developments has made. So shall I do that now?
Yes, it's probably a good opportunity.
Okay, thank you. There were 3 points made. The first one relates to not being able to see the reasons why particular sites have been selected or not. We spoke a moment ago about Appendix 5 of the Sustainability Appraisal Report, which sets out the reasons that the Council has taken for the reasons for which particular sites have been taken forward into the plan or not. So those are there in the Sustainability Appraisal. They are also reported in the text in relation to the sections on reasonable alternatives at the start of each main part of the report. There's a summary on reasonable alternatives to the sites put forward in the plan, similarly for the policies, and the comparison is made there. The reasons are given there as to why the Council has taken forward particular sites or rejected the reasonable alternatives. In terms of the reasonable alternatives for different levels of housing and looking at different levels of growth in relation to the full objectively assessed need, it is correct that higher levels of growth have been considered and were considered at an earlier point in the plan preparation process. 5 different levels of growth were considered and consulted on in relation to a consultation called How Many Homes, which was in 2011. And levels of growth ranged up to over 14,400 homes at that point. So that was well above the objectively assessed need at that stage, and indeed at the stage of the plan preparation.
As well as being consulted upon, were they sustainably appraised?
They were at a high level, so they were consistently, they were appraised against the sustainability framework. They were appraised based on the levels of growth. So they didn't look at sites because that information wasn't available at that time. Mm-hmm. They looked at what the different levels of growth would mean in relation to the sustainability objectives. So, for example, the lowest level of growth that was put forward was urban capacity only, So that was just, I think, 2,500 or so. No, nearly 3,000 actually, 2,925 urban capacity only. And those impacts ranged from those. Obviously, the low levels of growth would have an impact on housing delivery because insufficient homes would be delivered, and then ranging up to the upper level, which was based on household projections at the time, where more development, more environmental impact. I mean, that's simplifying it, but that's effectively what we did. We looked at each of those housing levels consistently between those, and that was consulted on. That consultation included the East of England plan housing figure of around 10,000 homes over the plan period.
You can point me to a document where that's done then?
Yes. Yep, that's the How Many Homes consultation 2011.
Yeah, consultation's not sustainable appraisal, is it?
No, it was accompanied by.
Yeah, well, is there a sustainability appraisal accompanying your
Yes.
consultation? Okay, well, what's the reference to the document?
It's called Sustainability Appraisal Matrices, and it accompanied the How Many Homes consultation 2011. And that's
Can you give
available
the
on the
details
website.
to the programme officer? And if
Yeah.
we've not got a copy, maybe we should have a copy of it.
Yes, of course, yeah. Coming back to the current plan, the sustainability appraisal of policy SP2, which talks about the housing target of around 20,000 homes, and it noted that it was around 500 homes below the lower end of the objectively assessed need range. So at that stage, the OAN was a range with an upper and lower end. And the sustainability appraisal identified a mixed positive and negative effect with uncertainty. And the reasons for the choice of housing per target are provided in the sustainability appraisal report at page 40 to 41. And basically, it reports at paragraph 5.38 that the housing target in the plan has been informed both by the objectively assessed need and by consideration of potential allocations, strategic sites and smaller key sites, and the deliverability of these sites. And this has included the impact of allocating land on environmental, economic and social policy objectives as informed by the SA. There's therefore been a combination of site-based, suitability and deliverability of sites, and need-based, coming from the OAN, a combined approach to identifying the housing target. And that has been reported in the SA. The housing target is intrinsically linked to the settlement strategy. Consideration of those higher housing targets that I mentioned earlier is reported in the SA report, and I can just point you towards the paragraph. It's paragraph 5.14 onwards. So that was the How Many Homes consultation. Oh, thank you. My colleague's just given me the document reference for you, sir. It's SA /3 is the How Many Homes SA.
4/3?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay. In terms of whether the full OAN had been assessed in the SA as a reasonable alternative, at that stage, that would have meant including more sites, which the council had rejected through its site selection process. So that's why that wasn't included at that point.
When you say full objectively assessed need, do you mean the full objectively assessed need at the time you were consulting on
yes.
the submission plan?
Yeah.
All right, not the need that's put forward now?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. As I understand it, if the plan were to deliver the housing that it's put forward, it would deliver about 80% of the updated OAN, which we've now got. Shall I move on to the next point that Mr. My neighbour, I do apologise, I don't know your name. It's very rude of me. Mr. Bolton, sorry, Mr. Bolton. Bayard Developments. This relates to the stepped approach to housing policy SP2, which gives which talks about the deliverability, amount of homes to be built per annum over the plan period.
Is that a sustainability issue?
I don't think it necessarily is, to be honest. I've got a short response on it, if you want. What I can do is we in assessing the plan against the sustainability objective for meeting the housing requirements, we did make reference to the OAN as it was at that stage, and we also referenced an uncertainty over build rates. So the sustainability appraisal did mention that there was an uncertainty in delivering the housing because there was required to be such a significant increase in build rates over the recent period. And indeed, the local plan references this at paragraph 5.9, so that a 55% increase in build rate is required over the plan period. And so the uncertainty over build rates that is recognised in the sustainability appraisal simply reflects that. And my understanding that the stepped rate in the local plan relates to the fact that somehow some sites will take longer to come forward effectively, but I think Sue may want to mention that if necessary. But
we will no doubt look at that in detail in due course.
Thank you.
Okay. Did you quickly want to come back, Mr. Bolton?
Just very quickly on SA 4/3, that's attached to the I believe 2011 assessment of the sustainability appraisal in 2011. I've looked at that. I don't think that that's a full assessment, even of the range they considered at that time. Obviously, you can look at it and come to your own view. One of my main criticisms of that assessment is it assumes the houses aren't required. And that's quite important, because if you're assessing a number of houses being provided in Helen and Hatfield, of course a lower number will have a lower environmental effect if the higher number is not needed. If the higher number is actually needed to house the people of our nation, then they have to be provided somewhere, and there will be an impact. So therefore, when you do the assessment, you have to take into effect that those dwellings are going to have to be met somewhere else, and that might well have greater negative effects, and that needs to be taken in any assessment. It seems to me illogical to undertake sustainability assessments because rejecting the need that the houses need to be met at some point, because otherwise everyone would claim that a lower level of figure would be more sustainable, and that people should either just move out or live in more condensed household groups or travel further to work. That seems to me to be make a nonsense of the sustainability appraisal. So if you look at that document, and my view is it does not form a full sustainability appraisal of what I think are the reasonable alternatives.
Okay. Go on.
very quickly. Can I just say it doesn't assume that houses aren't required, because one of the sustainability appraisal objectives is to provide homes for people that need them, and that's it's under criteria 5.1. So it would get higher housing numbers would score positively under the sustainability appraisal under that criteria.
I'll have a look at it.
Okay, thanks.
Ms Quinton, you've been sitting patiently.
Thank you. I'd just like to say that I'm not a planning expert, and I struggled slightly to get through the sustainability report, but I did make a couple of observations. Some of them relate to specific sites, and I assume that would be better taken up at a later stage.
You would? Yeah.
But the other thing that I did notice going through the report, which is an extension of Mr. Strachan's argument, was that the sites which had were in the plan as agreed sites, some of them had low sustainability scores and was considerably lower than some of the reasonable alternatives. And in fact, one of these examples would be Hat 15. And a lot of sites, not just around Hatfield, but within the whole borough, have considerably better sustainability scores than Hat 15. And I don't know how much the sustainability affects the choice, but it seems that we are going with a low sustainability site and ignoring maybe a combination of other sites which are more sustainable in the borough. The position of the Simonside Hat 15 site impacts on Hatfield and Welwyn, and makes the number of houses planned around Welwyn Garden City itself far outweighs the number that are planned in the smaller villages, say like Brookman's Park and Cuffley, which I think could take a larger proportion of the number.
Okay. Would the council like to explain, why some sites that have scored better than others have been rejected?
Well, that was part of the site selection process.
Yeah.
So that took into account the results of the sustainability appraisal, but that was not the only reason which was taken into account, and other factors such as infrastructure were looked at, impact on the greenbelt, deliverability issues, strategic benefits associated with certain sites were also taken into account.
Okay. Nobody else? Oh, Mr. Adams.
Thank you, sir. I'll be brief. I think Mr. Bolton expressed concerns that we have relating to the relevance and weight that could be attached to the 2011 sustainability appraisal matrices very well. We would certainly question whether such a high level appraisal undertaken back in 2011 is adequate for assessing the implications of higher growth options, particularly as that was before the introduction of the National Planning Policy Framework, which has changed significantly the approach to assessing housing need, and also has changed very dramatically the weight that should be attached to meeting housing needs from a social and economic point of view. So we would say that very little weight could be attached to that analysis, given the changes in circumstances since then. Moreover, we now have a housing evaluation assessment, HELA, and a sustainability appraisal that have found a large number of sites to be suitable, available and deliverable and reasonable alternatives, but not allocated. And we calculate that 1,800 homes fall into that category of being found to be suitable, available, deliverable, reasonable alternatives.
But that's an argument about the site selection process, not about the sustainability appraisal. I mean,
I think
you may argue the council got that wrong and they've given too much weight to infrastructure, whatever, but that's nothing to do with sustainability,
well,
and which is what we're talking about.
it is, sir, but Ms Kent introduced the 2011 sustainability appraisal as part of the council's evidence for not taking a higher housing figure. Since 2011, a lot of work has been done on site selection and evaluation, and we think at least 1,800 homes could be delivered on sites that have been included to be inherently sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
And so we say that changes, that's very relevant to the conclusions that were reached in 2011, which are now clearly out of date. And obviously this is something we can come back to.
She said that they weren't based on a site-by-site analysis, it was based on the impact of overall numbers on Welling Hatfield.
Yeah, and I think our point is that the higher, one can now assess much more accurately the impact in sustainability appraisal terms of taking a higher housing figure, because you've got a more robust evidence-based.
Maybe, yeah. Okay, last word to Arlington then.
Well, I think I'm probably all that's standing between you and lunch. I'll be very...
Not quite.
Well, very briefly. First point, just 3 comments. The first comment is just to pick up on what you've just said. This session is looking at the sustainability appraisal, not site selection. The answers you got back from the council about that comparative analysis focused on the section in the sustainability appraisal and site selection, section 5. That's got nothing to do with this. The question for you is, has the sustainability appraisal section 6, carried out the assessment of reasonable alternatives on a comparative basis? Nothing to do with site selection. Where's the exercise that's required? The second point is, I think it's been said both by the councillor and Mrs. Kent, well, we may not have done it so you can see it side by side, but you can compare the matrices. That's the challenge set for you. And 2 points on that. Can I just give you the references so when you look at this you can see what I mean? In paragraph 6.315 through to 6.327, there is the comparison of reasonable alternatives in or around Hatfield with allocated sites in and around Hatfield. None of the reasonable alternatives are shut out on non-deliverability grounds or anything of that kind. It's a basic comparison judgment, and you can see the conclusion 6327. The view is they didn't perform more positively than the allocated sites, so that was a judgment. But they weren't saying they're not positive as compared with other sites. They're just comparing the allocated in and around Hatfield. If you ask the question, well, where are they compared against the new village proposal? Nowhere. There's no textual analysis of it at all. And the third comment, can you do the exercise from the matrices? Well, A, you shouldn't be doing it because it should be set out in this document itself. But if you try, and I'll just set you this task, you've got to say, is it sound? And we're told it's all done on an objective basis. I'll just give you one example.
Yeah.
And I won't confine it to our site. I'll just, if you turn to page 168 in the document, there's one example for you to take away with you in your main long reading list. But 168, remember this is the matrices. SGS6, that's Simon side. Just take proximity to employment and services, significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions from transport. You see that? There's a double plus green for Simon side in terms of proximity to employment and service. That's what's said. Okay? If you turn back to the in and around Hatfield reasonable alternatives, that's on page 134.
Yeah.
You can see our site, well, Hat 2, 2 pluses green. And I said I wouldn't confine it to our site. You'll see two other sites in and around Hatfield get 2+ greens for that same category. Turn to the map, page 134. I took you to earlier. Sorry, it's 127. We were on page 127A.
Yeah.
Figure 6.2. One of your questions on the agenda is the SA sound. Look where Hat 15 is. Proximity to employment and services gets the same rating as Hat 2. Hat 2 is next door to a business park and the built-up area of Hatfield. Hat 15 is in the middle of the countryside. It's not proximate to employment and services. And that demonstrates either that the whole exercise is unsound, or, as I said to you at the very outset, it's not, Sineside hasn't been compared with the Hatfield in and around sites, as I indicated. It's been compared with other rural areas. But that's not the exercise that's required. I mean, you can make sense of that, how Hat 15 could score the same as all the other sites around Hatfield for proximity to employment and services who are doing better than me.
Okay, thank you. Right. Is Mr. Oakenfield here? No, okay. The next item on the agenda is the habitat regulations. I had a discussion with Mr. O'Leary during the break, and we agreed that as is concerns really related to development southeast of Welwyn Garden City, and as there is very likely, for the information of everybody, to be a joint session with East Hertfordshire, who are currently examining their local plan on the benefits and disbenefits of developing there sometime before the end of the year, we felt it would be better to bring that up there. The only other person that's basically submitted anything on habitats regulations is Mr. Oakenfold. And again, it's really about the same matter. He's claiming that the report that was produced by Tarmac for the benefit of the council is flawed. But again, we can no doubt pick that up when we actually have a joint session with East Hertfordshire. So, unless anybody really urgently wants to talk about the habitat assessment, I'm going to assume that it's legally sound. Okay, and I will now adjourn until 2:15, when we will move on to whether or not the DPD has had regard to appropriate national policy.
sound. What do you mean by that? Just the process is legally sound. Rather than you're not accepting the result of it, you're just saying the process is sound. Is that right? Because habitats is a big issue, and that seems to be a...
Well, habitat regulations, remember, are European sites.
Yeah.
I don't know to what extent Wellings and bounties with them. I don't think there's that many. I mean, what I'm saying is, yeah.
There's a lot of work being done, and it's might be...
Well, nobody's criticising either the extent or, if you like, the way it's been done, whether or not there are major flaws in the assumptions put forward or the analysis.
Peter Oakenfield's submission was, but I'm sure he would have...
Mr. Oakenfield, no, his submission is very similar to the one put forward by Mr. O'Leary.
Right.
They're both talking about development southeast of Welling Garden City, where, you know, it's basically about flora and fauna in that area. It's not about, you know, special scientific interests and Ramsar sites and what have you, which is what habitats regs are meant to address.
Right. I was just concerned that it just seemed to be you're accepting it, and that's it.
Well, unless somebody tells me it's wrong,
right,
and points to me, you know, like they've been trying to do in terms of the sustainability appraisal, you know, they've got it wrong, they didn't do it properly.
Right.
I'm not saying that that's right, but, you know, they're alleging, and they've given me examples to go and look at. Unless somebody says that this has not been done in the right way, I can't go along with it.
So, one of my objectives was to hopefully get thorough discussion on that cross-border site, but that's effectively what will happen at that joint.
But then that cross-border site's not a Ramsar site, it's not a site set. Yeah, that's right. So, in other words, it isn't really relevant to it.
I know that.
Yeah.
But in terms of deliverability and viability aspects, that becomes relevant.
Oh yeah, definitely.
That's the thought.
Yeah.
All we want.
Yeah, I mean, they may argue when we get to it that it's mitigatable, that, you know, you have some land set aside, and you have a corridor through for the birds to fly through, etc., etc. Anything's possible.
Yeah, but that's the discussion then about the value of the site ecologically versus what we can mitigate, what's viable, all that.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it might be that the site gets reduced or the number of dwellings get reduced. I just don't know.
No, I know.
Yeah, but that's totally different to saying that this is unsound.
Is the one question then, that joint session that you taught, is that going to happen sort of in parallel but not as part of the inspector's hearing? Or is that like a pre-hearing matter or something? Or is that
Well, it's basically been requested by Gascoignes and Tarmac.
Okay.
Who are on opposite sides of the fence. I mean, Gascoignes are basically, along with English Heritage, objecting to the impact on Hatfield House. Tarmac are part landowners and want to maximise development potential.
Yeah.
There are issues, like what you've just been talking about, that just don't stop at the boundary between East Arts and Welling. So, as it's been examined at the same time, it's a little bit ahead of